Now, Alcott, 2026, Nature Human Behavior. Political ad exposure was highly skewed on both Facebook and Instagram leading up to the 2020 election, with most users seeing relatively few impressions per week, but a small minority experiencing very high levels of exposure, as reflected in large gaps between the means and medians. On both Facebook and Instagram, participants in swing states and participants who voted in 2016 were more likely to see ads than those who were not in a swing state or did not vote in 2016. Participants who reported being undecided voters on the baseline survey see fewer political ads than those who reported that their minds were made up. Political advertising on Facebook and Instagram is not primarily used to target undecided voters with persuasive messaging. Instead, most social media ads seek campaign contributions and voter information, not mobilization or persuasion. A majority of political ad impressions were list targeted, especially for presidential campaigns, suggesting a deliberate strategy to reach their own partisans. And partisans primarily saw donation ads, while persuasion was the most common goal of ads shown to supporters of the other party. Democratic presidential ads were shown mainly to Democrats, while Republican presidential ads were shown mainly to Republicans. Both types of ad were most likely to be shown to the strongest partisans. Independents were shown the fewest political ads overall. Removing Facebook and Instagram political advertising had no detectable effects on outcomes, including candidate favorability, turnout, participation, contributions, political knowledge, polarization, or perceived legitimacy of the election. The only exception where there appears to be an effect is in the all ad removal condition, which found an increase in engagement compared to the control condition. The increase in engagement could arise because political ad removal increases overall time spent on the platform or because political ad removal shifts online behavior. This effect is only significant before correcting for multiple comparisons, rendering this effect of political ad exposure on engagement exploratory. Although there were null effects of exposure to political ads on many outcomes, confidence intervals are nevertheless consistent with a positive return to advertising spending. In sum, even though the impact of Facebook and Instagram advertising on aggregate political outcomes was minimal at best, even very small effects could have been enough to make the advertising worthwhile for campaigns, given its low cost. At the upper end of the confidence intervals, even the effect on donations alone would exceed what advertisers paid for their ads. Again, Alcott, 2026, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Borjas and Bresnow, 2026, Science Advances. 71 research teams, comprising 158 individual researchers, used the same publicly available surveys to answer the same question: does immigration reduce the level of public support for the social programs that make up the welfare state? Research teams that had strong pro-immigration sentiments were more likely to obtain positive parameter estimates, suggesting that immigration increases public support for social programs, which social and behavioral scientists consider to be an indicator of increased social cohesion. Conversely, strongly anti-immigration teams were more likely to obtain negative estimates, suggesting that immigration reduces social cohesion. The implication is that ideology meaningfully shapes the production of research findings, largely by influencing the decisions researchers make when selecting among alternative modeling strategies to analyze the same data and address the same research question. Again, Borjas and Bresnow, 2026, Science Advances. Now, Moritz, 2026, Political Psychology. Metacognitive training presents seemingly simple questions that activate common stereotypes about an outgroup and encourage participants to give confident, stereotype-consistent responses. Participants then receive factual, counter-stereotypical explanations about the correct answers, which is intended to plant seeds of doubt in overconfident judgments and provide insight into the fallibility of one's knowledge. In Germany, improvement in hostility toward the opposing political party after receiving factual, counter-stereotypical information was predicted by the number of high-confidence errors participants made. In other words, those with the most strongly held incorrect beliefs changed the most. Again, Moritz, 2026, Political Psychology. Now, Blair et al., 2025, Political Psychology. Depolarization workshops can reduce effective polarization, but may also reduce willingness to counter false or racist claims when doing so would require potentially combative interactions without partisans. Participants were more willing to confront racism and misinformation when they believed it would not spark conflict, but less willing when they thought it might create ill will. This may be because the workshops heightened participants' general aversion to cross-partisan conflict by encouraging them to agree to disagree or ignore provocative statements. Another possibility is that the workshops diminished participants' sensitivity to racism and misinformation by encouraging them to consider, with an open mind, the possibility that racial microaggressions do not constitute racism at all, or that misinformation about public health is simply an exercise in free speech. Therefore, it may have not been the reduction in effective polarization so much as the way effective polarization was reduced that discouraged confronting racism and misinformation. Again, Blair et al., 2025, Political Psychology. Now, Brown-Devlin et al., 2025, Communication and Sport. Evaluations of sports brands may be influenced by their partner brand. For instance, Fox Sports was rated by respondents as being the most biased sports brand, a finding that was driven primarily by those who self-identified as belonging to the Democratic Party, suggesting that the Fox brand is viewed through the lens of its partner brand, Fox News. Greater political identification strength was marginally positively associated with greater perceived sport media bias, indicating that greater political identification strength may encourage individuals to report sports media is more biased. There is a significant negative relationship between perceived sports media bias and perceived credibility towards sports media. Specifically, when fans perceive higher degrees of sport media bias, they tend to have a lower credibility perception of the sports media. Therefore, sports media brands who wish to score well in terms of credibility must be committed to appearing objective and transparent. Again, Brown-Devlin et al., 2025 Communication in Sport. Now, Carey et al.'s 2025 Science Advances. In Study 1, credible sources affirming election integrity and pre-bunking messages with a forewarning while delivering factual content about election safeguards almost always increase confidence in election results, both retrospectively and prospectively. These effects were often greatest among those who were most misinformed. These findings were present in studies conducted in the US and Brazil. In Study 3, in contrast to Study 1, the pre-bunking of messages with a forewarning while delivering factual content about election safeguards had minimal effects, though the same pre-bunking of messages without a forewarning had greater effects. The implication is that forewarning, which has been presented as an important part of the broader inoculation approach, can hurt the efficacy of corrective information treatments. An example of a forewarning is as follows. Some politically motivated groups are using misleading tactics to confuse voters and sow distrust in the electoral process. Here is the truth about some claims you might hear concerning elections in the United States. Again, Carey et al.'s 2025 Science Advances. Now, Dias and others 2025 The Journal of Politics. Only a minority of participants said they engage in any canceling behavior. However, the degree to which participants assume others from both their in-party and the out-party engage in canceling behavior is drastically exaggerated. While the exaggerations are present for the in and out party, the exaggerations are larger for the out party than the in party. Republicans believe Democrats cancel more than Democrats believe Republicans cancel. This is in line with another finding from this study that Democrats consistently report having canceled more than Republicans. However, when asked about canceling actual offensive statements, Democrats and Republicans themselves engage in canceling behavior at similar rates. Therefore, the reason Democrats may engage in more canceling behavior is because there are simply more things that offended Democrats at the time the survey was fielded. This could be permanent, or in the future, there could be a greater supply of content that offends Republicans. The clearest and most important factor that drives canceling is what speakers say, not who they are. Further, Americans' perceptions of why others cancel are generally accurate. More specifically, Americans perceive that both in-partisans and out-partisans cancel primarily in response to offensive statements that contradict their ideology. Again, Dias and others, 2025, The Journal of Politics. Now, Furness et al., 2025 Science. Policy citations of science have increased steadily from 20% in 1995 to 35% in 2020, with the increase being especially pronounced among think tank documents. However, there are some partisan differences. Policy documents from Democratic-controlled congressional committees are nearly 2 times more likely to cite science than those from Republican-controlled committees. However, both parties have increased their use of science over time, albeit at different rates. The partisan differences amongst think tanks are even more stark. Policy documents from left-leaning think tanks are more than 5 times as likely to cite science than those produced by right-leaning think tanks. The reasons for the differences seen between congressional committees and think tanks may be because policymakers are more concerned about unintended consequences, or that the study included only partisan or ideological think tanks, excluding nonpartisan or centrist think tanks. The papers committees and think tanks cited also differ by partisanship. Compared to the expected level of bipartisan citation of the same paper, which is around 12%, the actual bipartisan citation of papers is 5%. Put another way, when partisans do cite science, they are consistently less likely to cite the same science than would be expected by chance. Further, committees draw on different topics of scientific papers based on party control. For instance, Democrats are more likely to cite papers related to abortion and guns. Republicans are more likely to cite papers related to high school athletic injuries and opioids. As expected, Democratic elites trust scientists substantially more than their Republican counterparts. Interestingly, political elites show greater trust in scientists than likely voters from their own party, regardless of political affiliation. Again, Furness et al., 2025 Science. Now, Hyde et al., 2025 Science Advances. When discussing a participant's most important issue to them using an LLM, evidence-based arguments prompt evidence-based replies. Respectful language fosters respectful replies, and signaling openness to compromise encourages similar openness from interlocutors. However, there is no evidence that evidence-based argumentation, respectful language, nor openness to compromise influence the strength or certainty of people's issue positions. Engaging people with evidence and using a respectful tone not only have direct effects on the contents of discourse itself, but also broaden others' openness to alternative political viewpoints. Openness to compromise has no effect on another's openness to alternative political viewpoints. The use of evidence-based arguments, respectful language, or signaling an openness to compromise also cause respondents to see interlocutors themselves in a more positive light, namely, as making good arguments, being open-minded, being constructive, being better informed about politics, and being less disrespectful and ideologically extreme. Again, Hyde et al., 2025, Science Advances. Now, Holliday et al., 2025, Election Law Journal, Rules, Politics, and Policy. A plurality of Republicans believe that U.S. elections, in general, produce inaccurate results, and also believe that voter fraud occurred in the 2022 midterms. On the other hand, a plurality of Democrats believe that U.S. elections, in general, produce accurate results, and also believe that voter fraud did not occur in the 2022 midterms. Skeptics are significantly more likely to be white than the general U.S. population, and less likely to come from the top income brackets. The vast majority of skeptics fail to attribute this fraud directly to conspiracy theories. Among those who cited issues with election administration as evidence of fraud, many stated rationales like taking too long to count votes at 17% and mail-in ballots at 12%. Again, Holliday et al., 2025, Election Law Journal, Rules, Politics, and Policy. Now, Hossein Mardi et al., 2025, Scientific Reports. Viewers of broadcast news received largely interchangeable news regardless of which station they watched, or when in time they watched it. In contrast, viewers of cable news saw a different mix of topics than those watching the broadcast networks, where these differences increased over time. Fox News viewers saw more coverage of topics emphasized by Republican politicians, whereas CNN and MSNBC viewers watched news coverage that converged on topics from Democratic politicians' agenda. Although talk and opinion shows continue to feature the most polarizing content, the widening polarization gap between cable and broadcast news is driven primarily by rising polarization within cable hard news programming rather than by changes in opinion or talk shows. Again, Hossein Mardi et al., 2025, Scientific Reports. Now, Marshleska et al., 2025, British Journal of Social Psychology. Narcissistic in-group identity, also referred to as collective or political narcissism, is defined as a grandiose image of one's in-group, an unrealistic belief about its greatness, accompanied with a simultaneous conviction that it is not sufficiently recognized and appreciated by others. Sample items read, liberals/conservatives deserve special treatment, or, it really makes me angry when others criticize liberals/conservatives. It was political narcissism, rather than political identification, that consistently predicted meta-dehumanization, dehumanization, and hostile intentions toward political outgroups across studies conducted in the United States and Poland. This suggests that how we identify with different political in-groups is of great importance. Meta-dehumanization was positively related to both political collective narcissism and the dehumanization of political outgroups. Again, Marchleska et al., 2025, British Journal of Social Psychology. Now, Milley and others, 2025, PNAS Nexus. As of February 2023, Twitter's engagement-based algorithm amplified partisan, emotional, and outgroup hostile tweets compared to a reverse chronological feed. Further, users tended to have more positive perceptions of their in-group and more negative perceptions of their outgroup after reading tweets the engagement-based algorithm selected compared to the reverse chronological timeline. For tweets overall, users had only a slight preference for tweets in their engagement-based timeline compared to tweets in their reverse chronological timeline. For political tweets, however, users preferred tweets that the reverse chronological timeline selected. This is notable because Twitter's A/B testing suggests that the engagement-based algorithm causes users to spend more time on the platform. Therefore, the engagement-based algorithm seems to be catering to users' revealed preferences in terms of engagement and usage patterns, but not to their stated preferences, particularly when it comes to political content. Again, Milley and others, 2025, PNAS Nexus. Now, Samayoa and Albarracin, 2025, Journal of Experimental Psychology, General. Following exposure to fictitious misinformation, bypassing generally improves people's attitudes toward a focal object, like vaccines for example, as well as attitudes toward restrictive policies and intentions to support restrictive policies regarding the focal object more than the correction. However, when using actual misinformation from places like factcheck.org, bypassing only had a significant benefit on focal object attitudes compared to the correction. There were no differences between bypassing and correction on policy support attitudes or policy support intentions. A reason for this may be that real-world factors external to the content of the messages influence policy attitudes and intentions regarding a focal object, because individuals have more prior attitudes regarding the focal objects. In the fictitious context, participants reported less discomfort after reading the bypassing strategy compared to when reading the correction strategy. This is proposed as maybe being a mechanism for why bypassing was more effective than correcting. The study also conducted a meta-analysis and found that bypassing improves misinformation belief compared to the control. However, it suggests that bypassing is not as effective as a correction when it comes to reducing misinformation belief. Again, Samayoa and Alberesin, 2025, Journal of Experimental Psychology General. Now, Stroud and Murray, 2025, Human Communication Research. Counter-attitudinal posts employing intellectual humility reduce social distance toward the author of the post and cognitive reactance in the reader of the post. It also increased perceptions of warmth and competence attributions toward the author of the post. However, counter-attitudinal posts had no effect on the participants' affective polarization levels or perceptions of their party's affective polarization levels. The article says there were suppression effects and mediation effects that may suggest a relationship between intellectual humility use and the affective polarization outcomes. All in all, it appears there is no downside to employing intellectual humility in online posts. Again, Stroud and Murray, 2025, Human Communication Research. Now, Asev et al., 2024. Scientific reports. Government failure reduces trust in government but increases social trust. This most likely happens because the trust lost in government is sought in social bonds. Again, Asev et al., 2024, Scientific reports. Now, Alcott et al., 2024, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Instagram deactivation reduced trust in information from Instagram without affecting trust in Facebook. Facebook deactivation reduced trust in information from Facebook without affecting trust in Instagram. Facebook deactivation increased time spent on other news and social media apps, including Instagram. Instagram deactivation caused almost no substitution to Facebook or news apps, but increased time spent on other social media apps. Facebook and Instagram deactivation has no effect on affective or issue polarization, candidate favorability, voting turnout, or the perceived legitimacy of elections. Both Facebook and Instagram deactivation reduce the amount of political information that participants self-reported getting from online news outlets, as well as from network, cable, and local TV news outlets. Facebook deactivation also reduced political information from radio. Again, Alcott et al., 2024, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, Allen et al., 2024. Science. Ambiguous, unflagged misinformation is more influential in driving vaccine hesitancy than outright false claims. Low credibility domains were 3 times more likely to reduce vaccination intentions than high credibility domains. But because high credibility sources published more articles with greater reach, low credibility sources contributed only around 10% to the overall decline in vaccination intentions. Flagged vaccine misinformation on Facebook had little impact after fact-checkers flagged and debunked them, but unflagged ambiguous misinformation, which cast doubt on vaccine safety and efficacy, was 46 times more influential in driving vaccine hesitancy. Again, Allen et al., 2024, Science. Now, Alte et al., 2024, New Media and Society. There has been a decrease in news participation in America from 2015 to 2022. Across 46 countries, including America, there has generally been a decrease in news participation. There has been an increase in news sharing via private messaging apps, like WhatsApp. Across the 46 countries, the factors that increase news participation include interest in news, having a bachelor's degree, and being a woman. Again, Elte et al., 2024, New Media and Society. Now, Arsenault et al., 2024, Political Psychology. The ideological asymmetry hypothesis suggests that psychological needs motivate people to adopt specific political attitudes. In particular, the ideological asymmetry hypothesis anticipates that individuals with a psychological need for structure and order and who are more sensitive to negative stimuli find solace and comfort in conservative approaches to politics. Some of the meta-analytic evidence supports the classical ideological asymmetry hypothesis. However, there are some concerns, including a lack of clarity regarding causality and investigation into moderators. Again, Arsenault et al., 2024, Political Psychology. Now, Eslet and others, 2024, Nature. Searching online to evaluate news increased the likelihood that participants believed a false article was true. Researchers wanted to determine whether this effect depended on timing or topic. To test timing, they repeated the experiment several months after the false stories were first published and again found that searching online increased belief in false articles. To test topic salience, researchers used newly published COVID-19 articles to examine whether the effect persisted when search engines contained abundant, credible information. However, they also found that searching online continued to increase belief in false articles. It appears that the reason searching online to evaluate news increased the likelihood of believing a false article was true is tied to the quality of information encountered. Participants who searched and encountered low-quality sources were more likely to believe misinformation, whereas those who encountered high-quality sources showed no meaningful difference from participants who were not encouraged to search at all. People with lower digital literacy were more likely to encounter unreliable information because they often searched using the exact headline or URL of false articles, which overwhelmingly led to low-quality sources in Google results. Searching online to evaluate news increases belief in true stories when people encounter low-quality sources, but the evidence is inconsistent regarding its effect on belief in true news when people encounter mainstream sources. Again, Aslett and others, 2024, Nature. Now, Boxell et al., 2024, The Review of Economics and Statistics. Increases in the non-white share of the population and increases in elite polarization increase effective polarization. Of the 12 states examined, America had the greatest increase in effective polarization over the 1980s to 2020. 5 states had smaller increases and 6 states had reductions in effective polarization. Again, Boxell et al., 2024, The Review of Economics and Statistics. Now, Brooks et al., 2024, Mass Communication and Society. Observing a positive cross-cutting interaction significantly reduces effective polarization and social distance compared to watching a negative cross-cutting interaction, but only marginally reduces effective polarization and social distance compared to the control. There was no difference between those who saw a negative cross-cutting interaction and those who were in the control. Exposure to positive cross-cutting discussion through identification with an out-party member character reduces effective polarization and social distance. However, identification with the in-party member in the same scenario can further exacerbate effective polarization and social distance. Again, Brooks et al., 2024, Mass Communication and Society. Now, Gaiety et al., 2024, International Journal of Public Opinion Research. Israelis exposed to the U.S. democratic decline narrative were more supportive of authoritarian governance than those exposed to the U.S. democratic resilience narrative. Again, Gaiety et al., 2024, International Journal of Public Opinion Research. Now, Chin et al., 2024, Political Communication. The use of out-group pronouns is associated with more engagement across all 3 platforms. The use of in-group pronouns is associated with more engagement on Twitter and Instagram, but the effect size is notably less than out-group pronouns. Again, Chin et al., 2024, Political Communication. Now Clark et al., 2024, Nature Human Behavior. The Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization Supreme Court ruling increased perceptions that people in America favor legalized abortion access. However, there were no statistically significant changes in the perceptions of Americans' moral opposition to abortion. After the ruling leak, responses of Roe v. Wade should be overturned increased. This increase was driven by Republicans. After both the leak and the ruling, Republicans assessed the court as significantly more legitimate, whereas Democrats assessed it as significantly less legitimate. Again, Clark et al., 2024, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Dawkins and Hansen, 2024, Political Behavior. A demographic similarity with one's conception of America decreases negative out-party affect, while a demographic difference with one's conception of America increases out-party affect. For example, a Republican who is less nativist in their views will feel less negative affect toward Democrats, while a Democrat who is less nativist will feel more negative affect toward Republicans. On the other hand, a Republican who is more nativist in their views will feel more negative affect toward Democrats, while a Democrat who is more nativist will feel less negative affect toward Republicans. Again, Dawkins and Hansen, 2024, Political Behavior. Now, Diamond, 2024, Management Science. Individuals assigned to the similarity or dissimilarity condition for painting liking did not differ in their perceptions of closeness or change in money given in a take or give dictator game. Individuals assigned to the similarity or dissimilarity condition for Trump liking did differ in their perceptions of closeness or change in money given in a take or give dictator game. The mechanism for closeness was in-group love. The mechanism for change in money given in a take or give dictator game was out-group hate. These results found for similarity in the liking of Trump also function for similarity in the liking of Biden. A lack of cooperation may not be the result of a categorical unwillingness to cooperate across parties, but rather one's grim expectation of the other party's members' willingness to cooperate. Again, Diamond, 2024, Management Science. Now, Ebbinghaus et al., 2024, Social Problems. Black Lives Matter protests led to increased police spending in Republican cities but had no effect in Democratic cities. Again, Ebbinghaus et al., 2024, Social Problems. Now, Fashing and Lelks, 2024, British Journal of Political Science. Greater strength of ancestral kinship encourages one to hold more conservative social attitudes. It can even encourage one to hold more liberal economic attitudes in some cases. Again, Fashing and Lelks, 2024, British Journal of Political Science. Now, Fredrickson, 2024, The Journal of Politics. Both being an in-party member and having policy positions similar to those of a candidate is more important than supporting Democratic behavior for garnering votes. The effects of being an in-party member are around 50% larger than the effects of having similar policy positions when it comes to a candidate garnering votes. Again, Fredrickson, 2024, The Journal of Politics. Now, Fry, 2024, American Politics Research. Compared to those who were interviewed immediately before January 6th, those who were interviewed immediately after January 6th reported greater dislike for Donald Trump, were less likely to identify as Republicans, and expressed less attachment to conservatism. The decline in liking for Donald Trump and identification as Republican was especially pronounced amongst those who had voted for Trump in 2020. This party identity shift was Republicans becoming independents, not Republicans becoming Democrats. Again, Fry, 2024, American Politics Research. Now, Grimmer and Hirsch, 2024, Journal of Legal Analysis. Contemporary voting policies, like no-excuse mail voting or voter identification laws, barely make a dent on voter turnout, let alone on who wins or loses. Additionally, the aggregation of multiple election laws in a state does not mean that small effects accrue into larger effects. Again, Grimmer and Hirsch, 2024. Journal of Legal Analysis. Now Hewitt et al., 2024, American Political Science Review. Across different years and different office positions, none of the 30 variables that were examined consistently predicted vote change or favorability consistently with the exceptions of pushiness, which is how aggressive and explicit the ads are in instructing viewers what to do or think. Pushiness consistently predicted favorability, though only trended toward increasing vote choice. Again, Hewitt et al., 2024, American Political Science Review. Now, Hose et al., 2024, Nature Human Behavior. Misinformation interventions successfully reduce belief in false information, but they also increase skepticism towards all information, including accurate information. Again, Hose et al., 2024, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Hoey 2024, Party Politics. Regardless of whether one is a Democrat or a Republican, the greater one's level of intellectual identity, the greater their unwarranted certitude of fact, also referred to as epistemic hubris. A Democrat's anti-intellectual identity has no influence on their epistemic hubris. However, a Republican's anti-intellectual identity increases their epistemic hubris. Again, Hohe, 2024, Party Politics. Now, Holliday et al., 2024, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Title: The July 2024 Trump assassination attempt was followed by lower in-group support for partisan violence and increased group unity. There was no increase in out-party animosity in the days following the Trump assassination attempt in Pennsylvania compared to before the assassination attempt. Republicans supported partisan violence, including partisan murder, less post-assassination attempt. There was no difference for Democrats pre- to post-assassination attempt. Republicans also liked their in-party more post-assassination attempt, though once again, there was no difference amongst Democrats. This suggests that rather than demonizing Democrats, Republicans coalesced around their party, with a significant increase in in-party affect. In summary, Republicans liked their party more and supported violence against Democrats, including murder, less post-assassination attempt. Democrats had no changed pre- to post-election with respect to support for partisan violence and in- and out-party affect. For context, after the assassination attempt, support for partisan murder among Republicans dropped by an amount nearly 50 times greater than any change seen across all 637 other time periods since 2022. Again, Holliday et al., 2024, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Title: The July 2024 Trump assassination attempt was followed by lower in-group support for partisan violence and increased group unity. Now Holliday et al., 2024, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Title: Uncommon and non-partisan anti-democratic attitudes in the American public. Only around 10 to 15% of Americans support political norm violations, and only around 2% support political violence. However, perceptions of democratic norm violations and support for political violence are greatly exaggerated. These findings have remained stable over time and are around the same for Republicans and Democrats. Strength of partisanship and effective polarization have minimal effects on support for democratic norm violations and political violence. Age was consistently among the most important predictors of support for democratic norm violations and political violence, with younger individuals supporting democratic norms less and political violence more than older individuals. In some instances, like in the case of overturning the 2020 election, the discrepancy between Republicans' elites and Republican voters is larger than that of the discrepancy between Republican voters and Democrat voters, as well as Democrat elites. This suggests that the asymmetry lies not with Democrat versus Republican voters, but Republican voters and Republican elites. Again, Holliday et al., 2024, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Title: Uncommon and Nonpartisan Anti-Democratic Attitudes in the American Public. Now, Hopkins and Gorton, 2024, American Journal of Political Science. The treatment condition in this experiment was offering a free local newspaper subscription. When asking individuals why they did not accept the free local newspaper subscription offer, the most common answer was partisanship at 15%, followed by price at 10%. Again, Hopkins and Gorton, 2024, American Journal of Political Science. Now, Hussein and Wheeler, 2024, Journal of Experimental Psychology General. An in-party member communicating that they are receptive to a prototypical out-party source makes fellow in-party members more likely to view them more negatively. However, an in-party member communicating that they are receptive to a non-prototypical out-party source attenuates, and, in some cases, even reverses that effect. The proposed mechanism is that prototypical out-party members are seen as immoral, while non-prototypical members are judged less harshly. Again, Hussein and Wheeler, 2024, Journal of Experimental Psychology General. Now, Jarvis and Parkozzi, 2024, Routledge. High social media news use corresponded with a reduced likelihood of definitely accepting election results for both parties. Again, Jarvis and Parkozzi, 2024, Routledge. Now Janke, 2024, Political Behavior. Greater effective polarization, increased acceptance of in-party congruent misinformation, but decreased acceptance of out-party congruent misinformation for both Democrats and Republicans, independent of partisan strength and ideology. Greater political knowledge amplified these effects, reinforcing belief in in-party misinformation, while further rejecting out-party misinformation. The posited rationale is that politically knowledgeable individuals are more prone to confirmation and disconfirmation bias, and better at arguing for their preconceptions, making them more likely to accept in-party misinformation and reject out-party misinformation. This is particularly interesting, given that the main effect of political knowledge reduces misinformation belief. Again, Janke, 2024, Political Behavior. Now, Kahana and others, 2024, Oxford University Press. The laws of memory include the law of repetition, recency, law of contiguity, law of similarity. The law of repetition suggests that the speed and accuracy of remembering improve with repeated opportunities to study and retrieve the to-be-remembered material. Repetition not only leads people to correctly recall and recognize a greater proportion of items, but also leads them to do so more quickly. The decrease in response time with practice is one of the most universal properties of human and animal learning. Even when accuracy is near its ceiling, additional practice opportunities lead to faster response times, a finding that appears consistently in diverse studies of repetition effects in both episodic memory and skill learning. Although repetition improves memory, its effectiveness greatly depends on the learner's intention to learn. Without this intention, repetition alone often fails to produce strong memories. Temporal spacing between repetition leads to more rapid learning compared to when repetition is mashed together. Some theories as to why repetition helps include one suggesting that repeated exposure each lays down its own trace in one's memory. This occurs in two ways. First, having more replicas of an item or event in memory provides a stronger similarity signal at the time of retrieval. Second, if each learning opportunity yields a slightly different version of the memory, then repeating items leads to a more differentiated and elaborated memory trace. The law of recency speaks to our tendency to more easily remember recent events, and to forget information that has not been used after some period of time. The movie Inside Out provides a mechanistic account of such forgetting. The information gets stored in a large library or archive, and every so often a huge vacuum cleaner sucks up and discards those rusty old memories. However, much like iron rusting is not because of time, but rather the exposure to certain chemicals over time, the major reasons for forgetting information as time progresses is interference and contextual change. The interference account suggests that forgetting arises because newer or older similar memories compete with and block access to the target memory. The contextual change account suggests that, as time passes, the mental and environmental context in which a memory was encoded changes, making it harder to retrieve the memory unless the original context is reinstated. There are ways in which memory loss from recency bias can be avoided. For instance, some memories resist forgetting due to emotional significance or repeated rehearsal, which re-embeds them in new contexts and strengthens their persistence. This includes trauma or nostalgia. However, these memories may be faulty because of changes made each time the story is internally recited. The law of contiguity suggests that, after experiencing two items in temporal succession, These items tend to come to mind successively. This supports the view that temporal contiguity is an essential ingredient in associative learning. In retrieved context theory, the contiguity effect arises because recall of an item activates the context that was associated with that item during list presentation. Whereas the law of contiguity refers to the organization of memories governed by their time of occurrence, the law of similarity suggests that memories exhibit similarity-based organization along a wide range of psychological dimensions. The law of similarity helps our memory by linking related things together. So if you remember Mickey and Goofy on Mickey's Runaway Railway, it's easier to also recall Pluto because they're similar and connected in your mind. But the same law can sometimes trick you, making you think Donald was there too, even if he wasn't, because his similarity to the group pulls your memory off track. The law of primacy suggests that people generally exhibit superior memory for the first of a list of experienced items. The rehearsal explanation suggests that what is learned earlier is rehearsed more often, and greater rehearsal predicts greater recall. In this way, the primacy effect does not contradict with the recency effect because concepts learned earlier are also rehearsed toward the end of the sequence. Another explanation, referred to as distinctiveness, insists that individuals pay more attention to early list items because they are not distracted by prior items. Another explanation for the law of primacy is that primacy reflects a more basic process of neural fatigue, which is referred to as chamatosis. The idea behind chamatosis is that the neural circuits involved in doing a particular cognitive operation become fatigued and therefore cannot sustain this function indefinitely. However, these same circuits can quickly recover their ability to perform the task at hand. Much like the human musculature can only maintain a pose for so long before giving out, so too neural circuits require rest after a period of extended use. Again, Kahana and others, 2024, Oxford University Press. Now, Kerr et al., 2024, Public Opinion Quarterly. There is no relationship between expert-coded quality of elections in a state and confidence in elections in that state. The correlation strength is 0.01. The correlation strength between the quality of elections and trust in the counting is moderate at 0.4. The difference between election confidence and vote count accuracy indicates that citizens have a more holistic view of the electoral process and that their confidence is based on more than just the actual counting of the votes. Indeed, in many more established democracies, citizens are reacting to more subtle forms of manipulation, such as manipulation of electoral boundaries, insufficient campaign finance laws, or sophisticated forms of voter suppression. Again, Kerr et al., 2024, Public Opinion Quarterly. Now, Kim et al., 2024, Social Science Quarterly. Republicans were more likely than Democrats to switch to in-person voting in 2020. This may be because Trump pushed rhetoric that claimed that voting by mail was a source of fraud. Again, Kim et al., 2024, Social Science Quarterly. Now, Kim and Patterson Jr. 2024 American Political Science Review. By scraping the Twitter handles of those who followed The Apprentice in October 2020, researchers found that around 70% followed Trump, while fewer than 15% followed other Republican politicians. Regular viewers of The Apprentice felt more connected to Trump, dismissed negative information about him, and cited his business persona in their support. Exposure to the show also boosted his support in the 2016 Republican primary. Again, Kim and Patterson Jr. 2024 American Political Science Review. Now, Lajavardi and Oskui, 2024, Journal of Public Policy. Increases in American identity lead to greater support for anti-Muslim policy support for both Republicans and Democrats. Put another way, partisanship does not moderate the relationship between American identity and anti-Muslim policy support. Again, Lajavardi and Oskui, 2024, Journal of Public Policy. Now, Landry et al., 2024, Political Behavior. Partisan animosity is either not correlated with support for partisan violence and willingness to engage in partisan violence, or is negatively correlated with them. On the other hand, dehumanization is positively correlated with support for partisan violence and willingness to engage in partisan violence. Partisan violence resembles other types of intergroup violence, as the relevant variables are not unique to the political domain. This might suggest individuals inclined toward violence in politics might be similarly inclined in other areas of life, and vice versa. Support for abstract violence is higher than support for specified acts of violence. Additionally, willingness to engage in abstract violence, which itself is lower than support for abstract violence, is higher than support for specified acts of violence. In a nutshell, support for specified acts of political violence is greater than both support for abstract political violence and willingness to engage in abstract political violence. Again, Landry et al., 2024, Political Behavior. Now, LaPlante et 2024, American Politics Research. 70% of Republican House members tweeted about a 2020 election conspiracy between Election Day and January 6th. Republican House members without leadership positions were significantly more likely to promote election fraud, conspiracy theories, on Twitter, compared to members with leadership positions between Election Day and January 6th. Further, representatives from districts where Trump won overwhelmingly were more likely to promote election fraud conspiracy theories on Twitter. Conspiratorial tweeting amongst Republican House members increased the probability that a member voted to object to the 2020 election results. Being a freshman House member also increased the probability that one would vote to object to the 2020 election results. Again, Ella Plant et al. 2024, American Politics Research. Now, Lewandowski et al. 2024, Science Advances. The leak and the ruling on Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization led to perceptions of the Supreme Court's favorability, trust, legitimacy, and support for reform to be divided along partisan lines. This is notable because the Supreme Court of the judicial branch was the exception to the other branches of government with respect to polarization until Dobbs. The ruling also increased individuals' perception of how important potential U.S. Supreme Court nominations were to their presidential vote choice, particularly among Democrats. Again, Lewandowski et al. 2024, Science Advances. Now, Lucas et al. 2024, European Journal of Political Research. American politicians tend to perceive the electorate as engaging in identity voting, retrospective voting, and blind retrospection. The degree to which this is done is greater than the degree to which Canadian politicians do these things. Candidates who believe the electorate is more identity-oriented as opposed to policy-oriented, and retrospective-oriented as opposed to perspective-oriented, spend more time communicating with constituents and less time on policy development. Those who believe the electorate is blindly retrospective, i.e. unfair, as opposed to clear-sighted, i.e. fair, tend to spend less time on communicating with their constituents. And there is no significant difference with regard to time spent developing policy or helping constituents with their problems, although both trend negative, indicating politicians who see the electorate as unfair either significantly or trend towards spending less time on all three tasks mentioned above. Again, Lucas et al., 2024, European Journal of Political Research. Now, Martel et al., 2024, Psychological Science. Accuracy primes increased sharing discernment regardless of political ideology or partisan label. Again, Martel et al., 2024, Psychological Science. Now, Overgaard and Coleman, 2024, Mass Communication and Society. Partisan visual symbols of the Democrat and Republican logos, when compared to national visual symbols, worsened out-party effect and trait evaluations through increased 1. Anger and 2. Anxiety and decreased 3. Enthusiasm. Again, Overgaard and Coleman, 2024, Mass Communication and Society. Now, Phillips, 2024, Electoral Studies. Affective polarization simply maintains voter turnout amongst those who have voted before, and does not increase it for those who have not voted before. The mechanism for this sustaining of voter turnout is in-party warmth, not out-party hate. Again, Phillips, 2024, Electoral Studies. Now, Pradel et al., 2024, American Political Science Review. Support for moderating uncivil and intolerant speech was low compared to support for moderating violent threats. Individuals are less willing to support the moderation of content demonstrating toxicity toward billionaires, most willing to support the moderation of content demonstrating toxicity toward LGBTQ individuals, and Christians fall in the middle. Democrats generally desired more moderation than Republicans, regardless of whether the target of the toxic social media post was explicitly or implicitly a Democrat or Republican. Again, Pradel et al., 2024, American Political Science Review. Now, Putty et al., Crime and Delinquency. Exposing individuals to factual information about the immigration-crime relationship was associated with a decrease in respondents' attitudes that immigration increases crime when the treatment group included only those who read the article for longer than 10 seconds. When the treatment group included everyone assigned to the treatment group, even those who read for less than 10 seconds, there was no effective exposure to factual information on perception of the immigration and crime relationship. Amongst those who were assigned to the treatment group, reading the fact check for longer was associated with a greater decrease in respondents' attitudes that immigration increases crime. Being conservative, employed full-time, and living near a southern border state increased perceptions that immigration increases crime. Interestingly, when controlling for various factors including ideology, partisan identity as well as comfort with immigrants had no significant effect on perceptions of the immigration and crime relationship. Again, Padilla et al., Crime and Delinquency. Now, Puryear et al., 2024, P.N.A.S. Nexus. Partisans overestimate opponents' approval of basic morality wrongs, such as child pornography and homicide. This overestimation predicts more dehumanization and social distance. Correcting these misperceptions reduces dehumanization and social distance. Further, even when correcting misperceptions through an update of only one member of the out party, that also reduces dehumanization for the entire out party. Again, Purier et al. 2024 PNAS Nexus. Now, Safarpour et al. 2024. Journal of Race, Ethnicity, and Politics. Republicans self-reported more familiarity with critical race theory, hold more negatively valent sentiments toward critical race theory, and are less supportive of teaching it in public schools relative to Democrats. The posited rationale is that Republican elites successfully utilized a strong framing strategy to redefine CRT as an empty signifier representing broader racial and cultural grievances. Men are also more familiar with critical race theory than females. Respondents were significantly less supportive of teaching CRT than teaching about the legacies of racism in public schools. The difference for Democrats stems from those moving from supporting teaching about the legacies of racism to neither supporting nor opposing teaching critical race theory. The difference for Republicans stems from those moving from neither supporting nor opposing teaching about the legacies of racism to opposing teaching about critical race theory. Again, Safarpour et al. 2024, Journal of Race, Ethnicity, and Politics. Now, Scheich 2024 plus Climate. The most important factor for individuals considering climate change policy is the cost of that policy. The second most important factor is party endorsement. Both Republicans and Democrats evaluated cost as the most important factor for climate change policy, but Republicans significantly evaluated cost as more important than Democrats. Climate change bills with bipartisan endorsements are the most preferred. Climate bills with only Democrat endorsements are preferred more than those with only Republican endorsements or no party endorsements, regardless of which party one identifies with. Again, Scheich 2024 plus Climate. Now, Schwartz and Tierney 2024, Journal of Conflict Resolution. Painting China as a vivid threat alongside political elite agreement regarding how to handle a threat reduces effective polarization. However, painting China as a vivid threat alongside political elite agreement can increase support for violence against China. Although the overall percentage of individuals who supported violence against China remained low, it did increase support for the use of nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and civilian targeting, but not torture. Again, Schwartz and Tierney 2024, Journal of Conflict Resolution. Now, Shaw et al. 2024, Oxford University Press. The following are the three eras of campaigning. The first is wholesale campaigning, which transpired from 1952 to 1972. This era is defined by broad mass advertising, characterized by the use of tools like television as opposed to person-to-person retail advertising. The second is zero-sum campaigning, which transpired from 1976 to 2000. Although all campaigning could be considered zero-sum due to limited resources, campaign finance laws restricting contributions made strategic allocation of regulated funds more critical. The third is micro-targeted campaigning, which transpired from 2004 to 2020. While mass media like television remained important, the ability to raise unlimited funds and access extensive data shifted the focus toward maximizing financial impact rather than minimizing waste. Again, Shaw et al. 2024, Oxford University Press. Now, Stapleton and Langehennig, 2024, Electoral Studies. From 1952 to 2020, the proportion of the population that is a strong partisan has increased, while the proportion of the population that is a weak partisan has decreased. From 1952 to 2020, the proportion of the population that are pure independents compared to learning independents has stayed the same. Partisan identity remains the dominant force in American voting behavior. Political ideology has also been a predictor of how one votes in America, although not to the same extent as partisan identity. While the influence of partisan identity on vote choice has remained stable for weak and leaning partisans, the influence of partisan identity has increased for leaning independents, especially as of late with the 2012, 2016, and 2020 elections. Of the 13 elections from 1972 to 2020, educational attainment has been a predictor of vote choice in only the 2012, 2016, and 2020 elections, with more educated individuals voting Democrat. This suggests that educational attainment's impact on the election is a recent phenomenon. Again, Stapleton and Langehennig 2024 Electoral Studies. Now, Stout et al. 2024 Political Behavior. When a House member is a part of the in-party, their skin color has no effect on their approval for white participants judging non-white representatives. However, when a House member is a part of the out-party, darker skin color predicts lower approval ratings. Again, Stout and others 2024 Political Behavior. Now, Tyler et al. 2024 American Journal of Political Science. A compelling rationale for the Trump underestimate in 2020 was that Trump supporters were less likely to respond and less likely to complete the 2020 AINs if they did respond. The target populations were most likely not the reason, because when asking all voting age Americans only registered voters asking before or after the election, And considering the AAPOR report on the overestimate of Democrats, the margins are all overestimated in favor of Democrats by around the same amount. The sampled population was most likely not the reason, because the sampled households are also more rural than the national average. Even at the county level, pro-Trump counties are sampled at the same rate as in the national average. The winner bias was most likely not the reason, because pre-election margins between Republicans and Democrats are similar before and after the election. Again, Tyler et al. 2024 American Journal of Political Science. Now Van Bavel et al. 2024 Current Opinion in Psychology. The psychological component plays a key role in shaping partisan identity and its consequences, as individuals are often motivated to align with their partisan views rather than seek objective truth. However, the informational environment, such as the news sources one follows, can also shape partisan identity and its effects. For example, partisan differences in false beliefs about COVID-19 vaccines and resistance to changing those beliefs may not stem solely from a desire to stay consistent with one's party. Instead, prior exposure to certain information can create a situation where new evidence is resisted because there is so much information to the contrary of the new evidence because of one's prior informational context. Again, Van Bavel et al. 2024 Current Opinion in Psychology. Now Van Duyn 2024 Political Communication. Individuals in cross-cutting romantic relationships may need to negotiate the partisan lean of the content they watch, as well as the amount of political content they watch. For some, the divide was larger in the expectation of the amount of political involvement compared to the divide in the lean of the political involvement. The impacts of consuming political content in cross-cutting romantic relationships not only impacted those watching traditional television, but also impacted those asynchronously consuming content on social media. Social media should, in theory, help alleviate issues surrounding the selection, consumption, and discussion of news, in that partners can select and consume their own news on their own time, with more privacy from their partner. However, while some partners in this study sought to use social and mobile media precisely for this reason, many still shared digital news with their partner through direct messages, focusing on asynchronous CO consumption that fed conflict similarly to conflict stemming from synchronous CO viewing. Again, Van Duyn 2024 Political Communication. Now Van Loon et al. 2024 Communications Psychology. Greater imagined otherness, which is not the difference between one's view and out-party views, but most people's view and out-party views, increased blatant dehumanization. The tendency for imagined otherness to be associated with out-party dehumanization is stronger for those whose personal schema is more closely aligned with their in-party schema. Again, Van Loon et al. 2024 Communications Psychology. Now Varju et al. 2024 Political Psychology. In America, message incivility has no effect on message persuasiveness when compared to message civility for Americans. In Switzerland, message incivility reduced message persuasiveness when the message came from the in-group. No effect of incivility on persuasiveness was present for when the out-group said something. In America, messages with incivility were more persuasive for those higher in populist attitudes and dark personality traits in America. In Switzerland, populist attitudes did not moderate the relationship between message incivility and message persuasiveness. Again, Varju et al. 2024 Political Psychology. Now Yang and Kolovica 2024 Online Information Review. Sources on Wikipedia are slightly but significantly liberal-leaning. There was no evidence that conservative sources were less accurate, meaning the use of more liberal sources compared to conservative sources cannot be explained through the achievement of greater accuracy. Again, Yang and Kolovica 2024 Online Information Review. Now Young and DeWitt 2024 Political Psychology. Participants liked out-party factions more than their rival in-party factions, but preferred their in-party rivals on trait and social distance ratings. However, in no instance did a faction vote more for the out-party candidate than the rival faction candidate. Again, Young and DeWitt 2024 Political Psychology. Now On and Mutz 2023 Public Opinion Quarterly. Effective polarization between parties does not have a strong relationship with voter turnout, but polarization between candidates has a strong relationship with voter turnout. Roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of the increase in turnout from 2016 to 2020 appears to be attributable to levels of polarization in perceptions of presidential candidates. Again, On and Mutz 2023 Public Opinion Quarterly. Now Bruckman et al. 2023 American Journal of Political Science. Reductions in affective polarization reduce social distance when social distance is measured in the abstract. However, reductions in affective polarization do not reduce social distance when specific social distance measures. Manipulating affective polarization has no effect on political judgments like party loyalty in voting or electoral accountability, adopting one's party's positions, legislative bipartisanship, support for democratic norms, and perceptions of objective conditions. Again, Brookman et al., 2023, American Journal of Political Science. Now, Burke and Stetz, 2023, Social Psychology Quarterly. Identity prominence is how important an identity is to an individual. It has also been characterized as centrality, like how many identities a focal identity overlaps with. The more overlap, the more prominence. Identity salience is the probability that an identity is activated or invoked in a situation. High identity prominence intensified the negative consequences of non-verification, but high identity salience ameliorated the negative consequences. Again, Burke and Stetz, 2023, Social Psychology Quarterly. Now, Calabrese and Albarracin, 2023, Scientific Reports. A policymaker trying to curb misinformation that genetically modified foods cause cancer may introduce information that negates the genetically modified food to cancer link. Alternatively, the policymaker may instead bolster a common belief in the benefits of genetically modified foods for the environment, or introduce a new belief in the benefits of genetically modified food for saving the bees. Bypassing the misinformation. Both the bypassing and the correction conditions led to weaker support for genetically modified food restrictions and less positive attitudes toward genetically modified restrictions than did the misinformation condition, suggesting both strategies are effective. The rationale for this is that, while attitudes can be linked to multiple beliefs, these multiple beliefs will rarely be activated at the same time because of the limits of human cognitive capacity. This is the bypassing strategy and works because it redirects an individual's attention away from the misinformation to other beliefs. Again, Calabrese and Albarracin, 2023, Scientific Reports. Now, Clifton and Carey, 2023, Social, Psychological, and Personality Science. The belief that the world is full of differences that reflect objective merit and importance, also referred to as the hierarchical world belief, is most related to one's political ideology, with higher hierarchical world belief being related to more conservative beliefs. Researchers thought that the dangerous to safe belief spectrum, where liberals saw the world as safe and conservatives saw the world as dangerous, was the biggest influencer of political ideology. However, the way it was measured made it so that the things that one group saw as dangerous were dangerous to that group because they were specifically targeted toward that group, such as LGBTQ+ issues, and social decay being more dangerous for conservatives than liberals. Again, Clifton and Carey, 2023, Social, Psychological, and Personality Science. Now, Druckmann, 2023, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences title, Correcting Misperceptions of the Other Political Party Does Not Robustly Reduce Support for Undemocratic Practices or Partisan Violence. The misinformation correction alone reduces support for political violence and undemocratic practices compared to the control. However, the misinformation correction with uncertainty and misinformation correction with competition did not significantly influence support for undemocratic practices and political violence most of the time, compared to the control. As a matter of fact, the misinformation correction alone significantly reduced support for political violence and undemocratic practices compared to both the misinformation correction with uncertainty and misinformation correction with competition. Again, Druckmann, 2023, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences title, Correcting Misperceptions of the Other Political Party Does Not Robustly Reduce Support for Undemocratic Practices or Partisan Violence. Now, Druckmann et al., 2023. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences title, Correcting Misperceptions of Outpartisans Decreases American Legislators' Support for Undemocratic Practices. Legislators vastly overestimate the levels of animosity, support for undemocratic practices, and support for political violence among voters from the other party, though not among voters from their own party. They even underestimate support for undemocratic practices and support for partisan violence in the in-party. Legislators randomly assigned to receive accurate information about the views of voters from the other party reported significantly lower support for undemocratic practices and marginally significantly lower partisan animosity toward the other party. This suggests that legislators' democratic attitudes are causally linked to their perceptions of other party voters' democratic attitudes. For both the legislators' support for undemocratic practices and the legislators' animosity toward the other party, having a greater degree of prior misperceptions amplified the effect of the correction treatment. There is no effect of correcting legislators' misperceptions about the out party's views on support for partisan violence. Again, Druckmann et al., 2023. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences title, Correcting Misperceptions of Outpartisans Decreases American Legislators' Support for Undemocratic Practices. Now, Frieder and Shino, 2023, American Politics Research. Black respondents are more likely to believe legitimate votes are being suppressed, whereas conservative respondents are more likely to believe illegitimate votes are being counted. Therefore, the policy remedies that would lead to increased trust for one group would only further exacerbate the concerns of the other, suggesting that distrust towards American elections will be difficult to attenuate. Again, Frieder and Shino 2023 American Politics Research. Now, Furrer et al. 2023 Cognitive Research Principles and Implications. Using a continuous gradient instead of using dichotomous gradient steps can decrease perceived voting polarization and increase perceived voting influence. Compared to gradient maps, dichotomous maps polarized estimates for 43 states. However, for the 7 states with the highest voting margins, dichotomous maps led people to underestimate how polarized those states were. The different map colors, such as red and blue compared to orange and green, did not reliably influence perceived voting polarization and perceived voting influence. Again, Furrer et al. 2023 Cognitive Research Principles and Implications. Now, Garcia et al. 2023 Public Opinion Quarterly. Regardless of whether only partisans or the entirety of the electorate were asked, effective polarization has increased in America. However, partisans have grown more polarized over time than the entirety of the electorate, which includes both partisans and non-partisans. A key takeaway is that there are differences in the amount of polarization amongst the electorate compared to amongst partisans. Most studies examine effective polarization after removing independents, which means they are examining partisan effective polarization, not effective polarization at large. This increase in effective polarization exists regardless of whether only the feeling thermometer or feeling thermometer and other measures of effective polarization were used. However, using only the feeling thermometer increased the perception that the electorate had become more polarized over time compared to using the feeling thermometer and other measures of effective polarization. Amongst partisans in 17 democratic countries, 6 of them saw a significant increase in effective polarization, while 1 saw a significant decrease. The results are less significant in the electorate at large. Amongst the general electorate in 17 countries, only 2 saw a significant increase, while 1 saw a significant decrease in effective polarization. Again, Garcia et al. 2023 Public Opinion Quarterly. Now, Gonzalez-Bailon et al. 2023 Science. Facebook is substantially ideologically segregated. Conservatives tend to have more politically homogeneous and false content. Meta's fact-checker bot was used to assess falseness. Ideological segregation manifests far more in content posted by pages and groups than in content posted by friends. The finding that pages and groups are associated with higher levels of ideological segregation suggests that ideological congruence drives the choice of which pages to follow and which groups to join far more than the choice of with whom to be friends. Again, Gonzalez-Bailon et al. 2023 Science. Now Guess et al. 2023 Science. How do social media feed algorithms affect attitudes and behavior in an election campaign? There was no significant difference between the reverse chronological and algorithmic feed conditions with regard to effective or ideological polarization, as well as political knowledge. The reverse chronological feed resulted in users spending significantly less time on the platform compared to the algorithm used by Facebook and Instagram. The reverse chronological feed also increased the proportion of untrustworthy sources and political content in the feed. The reverse chronological feed increased the proportion of moderate and mixed sources in the feed, while decreasing the proportion of cross-cutting sources and like-minded sources in the feed. Put another way, the algorithmic feed exposed the user to more ideologically extreme sources from both sides of the aisle, while the reverse chronological feed made the content more moderate. Again, Guess et al. 2023 Science. How do social media feed algorithms affect attitudes and behavior in an election campaign? Now Guess and Others 2023 Science. Reshares on social media amplify political news but do not detectably affect beliefs or opinions. There was no significant difference between the preventing reshared content condition and control condition with regard to effective polarization. The no reshares group spent less time each day on average compared to the control group, which had reshares. This indicates that reshare capabilities increase a user's time spent on Facebook. Preventing reshares substantially decreases the amount of political and untrustworthy news one is exposed to. Preventing reshares also increased the proportion of moderate and mixed sources in the feed, while decreasing the proportion of cross-cutting sources and like-minded sources in the feed. Put another way, allowing reshares exposed the user to more ideologically extreme sources from both sides of the aisle, while preventing reshares made the content more moderate. Again, Guess et al. 2023 Science. Reshares on social media amplify political news but do not detectably affect beliefs or opinions. Now, Gaiety et al. 2023 Journal of Communication. Posting partisan content, having an unverified account, a newer account, engaging in bot-like behavior, posting offensive content, following a large number of accounts, and receiving fewer retweets of one's tweets increase the likelihood of being shadow banned. As trends in user behavior emerge and go away, algorithms appear to react to them by revising its content norms. For example, what is shadow banned during an election may no longer be shadow banned in a less sensitive time. Therefore, future research should avoid examining algorithms as static, but rather pay attention to the time context when examining how algorithms govern social media platforms. Again, Gaiety et al. 2023 Journal of Communication. Now, Jennings and Stroud 2023 New Media and Society. Republicans rated the Clinton derogatory misinformation as more believable than the Trump derogatory misinformation. On the other hand, Democrats rated the Trump derogatory misinformation as more believable than the Clinton derogatory misinformation. The following is about correcting misinformation using no label, a disputed label, and a false label. The misinformation correction only influenced misinformation belief for Democrats, and only when the false label was used for Democrats. For Republicans, no misinformation correction label had an effect. For Democrats, the disputed label condition had no benefit over the no fact-check condition. The following is about correcting misinformation using a partisan source with and without an explanation of the source. For Republicans shown the Clinton derogatory misinformation, providing sources with descriptions of those sources reduced misinformation belief compared to the no fact-check condition, regardless of partisanship of the source. This is interesting because the Republican source without an explanation did not have a significant effect on Republicans, while the Democrat source with an explanation did. This may indicate that more information is better for correcting Republican misperceptions, regardless of the partisanship of the source doing the correcting. For Democrats, there was no discernible pattern. Again, Jennings and Stroud, 2023, New Media and Society. Now, Kim et al. 2023, Political Communication. Memes invite emotional reactions indicative of stronger approval, such as love and haha reactions, whereas news content yields more like reactions. People seeing counter-attitudinal memes are more likely to block the meme, while people seeing the pro-attitudinal memes are more likely to comment on, share, and positively react to them, thus increasing the homogeneity of online networks. However, partisan memes had no influence on effective polarization. Again, Kim et al. 2023, Political Communication. Now, Kubin et al. 2023, Social, Psychological, and Personality Science. Within a novel threat context like COVID-19, people who prioritize preventing realistic threats to health or resources over their group's culture viewed opponents as rejecting realistic threats, and in turn morally condemned and dehumanized them. Similarly, people who prioritize preventing symbolic threat over realistic threat viewed opponents as rejecting symbolic threats, in turn morally condemning and dehumanizing them. These effects were significantly weaker for people prioritizing symbolic threat. This suggests that people condemn behaviors which are perceived as causing concrete realistic harm more than those causing abstract symbolic harm. When a person who prioritizes preventing symbolic threat argues that their stance is beneficial for reducing both realistic and symbolic harm, those who prioritize preventing realistic threat are less likely to morally judge and dehumanize those who prioritize preventing symbolic threat. Again, Kubin et al. 2023, Social, Psychological, and Personality Science. Now, Lewandowski 2023, the University of Chicago Press. The cross-party discussion prime was the most effective at reducing affective polarization at 12 degrees, followed by the American prime at 6 degrees, then the cross-party friendship prime at 4.5 degrees. Cross-cutting discussion is less effective for those with strong partisan identifications. As a matter of fact, if one were to test whether there is an effective cross-cutting discussion on strong partisans, one would fail to reject the null for all outcomes, except for the out-party candidate feeling thermometer item. Lewandowski supposes this happens because one substitutes accurate information for inaccurate information through discussion. For the recalling a friendship prime, Lewandowski proposes that recalling one's out-party friendships improved one's out-party affect, because one evaluated the outgroup in terms of their out-party friends, not out-party elites. When asked why they were proud to be American in 2015, the majority said our freedoms, like our freedom of speech, religion, and so on. Around a quarter cited the American dream and the land of opportunity. Around 10% said diversity. Another 10% chose patriotism. Around 6% rejected the prime, saying they were not proud to be American. Democrats and Republicans equally rejected the prime. When asked why they were proud to be American in 2020, freedoms and the American dream were still the top two answers. However, 12% rejected the prime, saying they were not proud to be American. Instead of half of these rejections coming from the left and the right, 85% came from the left. This is important because Lewandowski said, if the American identity becomes politicized and or racialized, it becomes just another political symbol, and it loses its power to unite us all as one. The American in 9/11 prime was only effective for Republicans and white participants, not explicitly for white Republicans, but white individuals and Republican individuals, although being a white Republican may amplify the effect. Similarity in sport team identity and proximity to the 2008 Olympics also reduced affective polarization. Again, Lewandowski, 2023, the University of Chicago Press. Now, Lin et al. 2023 PNAS Nexus. Fact-check ratings from 4 fact-checking sources and 2 other academic sources exhibit a strong correlation with each other, indicating there is consensus as to the trustworthiness of domains across multiple fact-checkers and academics. There are some challenges in comparing scores from other fact-checkers, however. Even when website credibility scores are standardized from 0 to 1, there are distinctions in what a score means, with some sources saying a 0.6 or above is credible, while other sources rate 80% of their sources below 0.6, even those that are credible. Again, Lin et al. 2023 PNAS Nexus. Now Ludwig, 2023 Cornell University Press. Those higher in the need for closure are also higher in group-centric partisanship. Group-centric partisanship is based on social identity as conceptualized by Tajfel. Therefore, the social identity framework may work best for those high in need for cognitive closure. For those who are low in need for cognitive closure, partisanship may reflect political perspectives, which are more policy-oriented. While it is true that Republicans tend to have a greater tendency for being higher in the need for closure than Democrats, being higher in the need for closure predisposes one to becoming a more group-centric partisan, regardless of which party one identifies with. People with a strong need for cognitive closure are more likely to seize on readily available information to reach a quick conclusion, as that is more closure providing than maintaining an open mind, and to freeze on that conclusion to maintain their closure once a judgment has been formed. Individuals lower on this measure of need for cognitive closure may not seize and freeze as much. The article distinguishes between emotion-based and cognitive-based social partisanship, where the former is based on an individual's need for affect, and the latter is based on an individual's need for closure. This study focuses on the need for closure, which is cognitive-based, not affective-based. The book suggests that the psychological need to avoid and/or eliminate psychic stress is a motivator for the need for cognitive closure. It also points out that malice is not what drives it. Partisan identities can be a place where this need for cognitive closure is met, as Ludwig compares partisanship to a religion in that it provides rules for and knowledge about the world. Again, Ludwig, 2023, Cornell University Press. Now, Masulo, 2023, New Media and Society. Priming a sense of common humanity through Facebook meme-like posts leads individuals to ascribe more positive traits toward one's out party, but has no effect on ascribing negative traits toward the out party. A rationale the study posits is that it may be easier to shift positive attitudes, while negative attitudes may be more entrenched and, thus, harder to influence. Democrats, or those who lean Democrat, ascribe significantly more positive and negative traits to the out party than Republicans, or those who lean Republican. Again, Masulo, 2023, New Media and Society. Now, Mayer and Smith, 2023, Nature Climate Change. Negative partisan strength moderates the relationship between partisan identity and support for climate-friendly policy, with Republicans who exhibit less negative partisanship being for climate-friendly policy more than Republicans who exhibit more negative partisanship. At low negative partisanship, Republicans and Democrats exhibit similar support for climate-friendly policy. This indicates that it is not being a Republican, but rather a Republican high in negative partisanship that predicts resistance to climate-friendly policy. Expressive partisanship, which is the opposite of negative partisanship, has relatively little impact on Republican resistance to climate change policy. With respect to climate change behaviors, one's party, negative partisan strength, and positive partisan strength have little effect. Again, Mayer and Smith, 2023, Nature Climate Change. Now McCarthy, 2023, Political Communication, and McCarthy, 2019, Public Opinion Quarterly. Partisan interest alone is insufficient to move opinion, as partisans who see their party elites admitting to implementing election rules for partisan benefit are no more likely to support those rules. This result helps explain why party elites typically couch their policy positions on election rules in terms of democratic principles. Principle-based justifications can influence public opinion. Elites have a wide latitude of which principles they can use to justify a given policy because both applicable and inapplicable principles can be effectively used to influence opinion. While these principle-based justifications can influence public opinion on a topic, they do not influence the endorsement of that principle. According to McCarthy 2019 Public Opinion Quarterly, partisans are less likely to support same-day registration when told it increases turnout among opposing partisans compared to the control, but not more likely to support same-day registration when told it increases turnout among CO partisans compared to the control. This suggests that while citizens may not be easily swayed from their prior opinions by in-party gain, the prospect of the out-party gaining an advantage may be a sufficiently motivating force to change opinions. Again, McCarthy 2023 Political Communication. and McCarthy 2019 Public Opinion Quarterly. Now, Moore et al. 2023, Nature Human Behavior. Being conservative and being older were predictive of visiting more untrustworthy sources in both the 2016 and 2020 elections. Untrustworthy source consumption went down from 2016 to 2020. Again, Moore et al. 2023, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Novoa et al. 2023, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Generic statements may be Democrats support the bill. Many statements may be many Democrats support the bill. Some statements may be some Democrats support the bill. Generic statements increase the perception that the mentioned party held the position described, while also increasing the perception that the unmentioned party did not hold the position. The same thing happened with the many statements, though the results were slightly more tempered. The results for the some statements were drastically different from the first two, with the some statements resulting in very similar percentages of the party mentioned and not mentioned holding the position. When a party endorsed something in real life more often, individuals were more willing to approve of generic statements to describe that party, even when less than half of the party endorsed that policy. For example, Republicans deny the results of the 2020 election is an acceptable generic statement because Republicans deny the election more than Democrats. But in reality, less than half of Republicans deny the election. On the other hand, when a party endorsed something less than another party, generic statements about party were approved less even when over half of the party endorsed it. For example, Republicans endorse public education is an unacceptable generic because Republicans disapprove of public education more than Democrats. But in reality, more than half of Republicans approve of education. Individuals were also more likely to endorse generics about the other party, and less likely to endorse generic about their party. Individuals displayed a bias where they tended to recall political statements as generic statements more than quantified statements, regardless of whether the original statement was presented as quantified or generic. However, being shown a generic political statement increased the likelihood that one would recall it as a generic statement, and being shown a quantified political statement increased the likelihood that one would recall it as a quantified statement. Again, Novoa et al., 2023. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, Nyhan et al., 2023. Nature. Half of the content on Facebook came from like-minded sources. 15% came from cross-cutting sources. The others are unidentified neither. A reduction in exposure to like-minded sources on Facebook had no impact on users' effective polarization, ideological extremity, and opinions on issues. Again, Nyhan et al., 2023, Nature. Now, Orr et al., 2023, and Diaz and Lelkes, 2022, and Orr and Huber, 2020. All from the American Journal of Political Science. Agreeing with a policy position that differed from the participants' party stance, but aligned with the participants' own stance, increased affect by 30 degrees, making it roughly twice as impactful as simply being a co-partisan who agreed with the party's stance but not with the participant's stance, which only increased affect by 15 degrees. This was assessed by finding people who diverged from their party on one branded issue, and seeing how they would evaluate others who were co-partisans that disagreed with them on the branded party issue compared to partisans that agreed with them on the branded party issue. Diaz and Lelkes 2022 believed that using unbranded issues allowed one to separate between partisan identification and partisan issues. Orr et al. 2023 claimed partisan identification still stood in for branded issues, which are policy issues, because unbranded issues did not provide any information on branded issues, which allowed for partisan identification to inform branded policy issues. While I agree about the flaws in the 2022 study, the 2023 study may be flawed in that one is asking individuals who may have less party loyalty and more of a policy focus because they are willing to diverge on a branded policy issue. This may make this population more likely to prioritize policy issues over partisan identity. The Orr and Huber 2020 study may also be flawed according to Diaz and Lelkes 2022. Here are some of the issues Diaz and Lelkes highlights. Firstly, partisanship may have a direct and mediated effect on effect, and the reduction in the variance explained when adding information about policy positions may simply be controlling for a mediator, not an indication that partisan identity has no effect. Second, policy positions taken by a party, such as being pro-life, can lead individuals to think that the pro-life individual is Republican, because that is the Republican stance. Third, even if the policy position the vignette takes is not in line with its partisan identity, one may still be viewed in terms of one's partisan identity because one could still be viewed as a disloyal Republican or Democrat. For example, a pro-choice Democrat may dislike a pro-life Democrat, not because they disagree on the issue of abortion, but because the co-partisan has signaled she is not a loyal Democrat. Again, Orr et al. 2023 and Diaz and Lelkes 2022 and Orr and Huber 2020. all from the American Journal of Political Science. Now, Overgaard and Collier, 2023. New Media and Society. Both Republicans and Democrats perceived pro-attitudinal claims to be true more often than anti-attitudinal claims with regard to elections and COVID-19. As effective polarization increases, Republicans and Democrats have greater divergence in beliefs on contentious issues. Google and YouTube use were associated with more problematic beliefs, while Facebook and Twitter use were associated with more accurate beliefs. Again, Overgaard and Collier, 2023, New Media and Society. Now, Petsko and Katie, 2023, Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. Conservatives dehumanize liberals as immature, while liberals dehumanize conservatives as savage. The meta-perceptions liberals and conservatives have about how they are dehumanized are accurate with regard to type. The meta-perceptions liberals and conservatives have about how they are dehumanized are not accurate with regard to quantity. Conservatives' meta-representations underestimated actual outgroup dehumanization, whereas liberals' meta-representations overestimated actual outgroup dehumanization. Put another way, liberals overestimated how much they were dehumanized, conservatives underestimated how much they were dehumanized. Again, Petsko and Katie, 2023, Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. Now, Piazza, 2023, Security Studies. Individuals who believe the opposing party to be a threat to the nation's well-being and that members of one's own party love America more are more likely to support political violence. Effective polarization in a democracy increases actual violence across 83 countries from 1950 to 2018. Note that the measure of effective polarization used in this study resembles more of a measure of dehumanization. Again, Piazza 2023 Security Studies. Now, Ratje et al., 2023 Nature Human Behavior. Financial incentives to be accurate increased accuracy. And this effect occurred solely because of the increased percentage of politically incongruent true headlines rated as true, not because of changes in the percentage of politically incongruent false. Politically congruent true or politically congruent false headlines rated differently. The non-financial accuracy motivation manipulation was also effective at increasing belief in politically incongruent true news, with an effect about 63% as large as the effect of the financial incentive. Again, Rachi and others, 2023, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Rajadesingan et al., 2023. Proceedings of the ACM on human-computer interaction. The misinformation correction game had no significant effects on effective polarization or social distance. Democrats evaluated Republicans more warmly, but Republicans did not evaluate Democrats any warmer. Both Republicans and Democrats had more over-exaggerations of Republicans than over-exaggerations of Democrats, allowing for more opportunities for Democrats to correct their misperceptions of Republicans. Playing the game increased reactance. In turn, reactance improved affect toward the out party, but decreased willingness to talk politics and increased social distance. A posited rationale is that social distance and willingness to talk politics are actions, whereas affect is a feeling, which may explain why the actions responded one way, while the affect responded another way to the reactance. Strength of partisanship and political knowledge did not moderate the relationship between playing the game and effective polarization. Again, Rajadesingan and others, 2023. Proceedings of the ACM on human-computer interaction. Now, Robertson et al., 2023, Nature Human Behavior. Negative language headlines increase the click-through rate of news headlines, while positive language headlines decrease click-through rate. For 15-word headlines, each additional negative word increases click-through rates by around 2%, while each additional positive word decreases click-through rates by around 1%. News generated more clicks when covering stories related to entertainment, LGBT, and people. In contrast, news related to government and economy had lower click-through rates. Sad headlines increased click-through rates, while fear and joy headlines decreased click-through rates. Anger had no significant effect. Again, Robertson et al., 2023, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Ryan and Minkoff, 2023, American Politics Research. As gridlock between chambers increases, policymakers increasingly use appropriations bills to change policy. Appropriations laws become longer when gridlock is higher, showing they are packed with more policy content. Authorizations are harder to pass because failure has no immediate cost, while appropriations must pass to avoid funding shutdowns. Again, Ryan and Minkoff, 2023, American Politics Research. Now, Sansa's 2023, Research and Politics. Respondents may believe there were issues with the counting of the vote, but this does not mean that they reject the election outcome wholesale. The modal respondent believes the election is legitimate, but still has some doubts about the vote count. Leading up to the 2000 election, 90% of Republicans said they would accept the results as legitimate, compared to only 50% of Democrats. After the Democrat loss, the number shrank by 20% to 30%, despite Gore's acceptance of the results once the Supreme Court made their ruling. The numbers are more similar between the two parties in 2016 and 2020, with Democrats being a bit more trusting pre-election. However, post-election, the winner is more trusting. Again, Sansa's 2023 Research and Politics. Now, Sides and Others, 2023, W.W. Norton and Company. Party identification as a social group identity separate from ideology is the strongest influence on voting in the U.S. Stronger partisan identity, which is not the same as party identification, makes people more likely to turn out because they are more emotionally invested in their party's success. Again, Sides and Others, 2023, W.W. Norton and Company. Now Tappan and Others, 2023, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. In general, when attempting to influence the same issue attitude, micro-targeting was significantly and substantially more effective than both the single best message and control conditions. Of the two topics tested, micro-targeting was only significantly more persuasive in influencing one topic, though micro-targeting trended toward being more persuasive in both topics. The number of covariates above 1 in the machine learning model, such as using only party and gender, did not significantly enhance micro-targeting's persuasiveness. Using micro-targeting to target different issue attitudes, not just different ways to approach the same issue attitude, is not more impactful than the single best message ad that speaks to the same issue in the same way regardless of the targeted individual. Again, Tappan and Others, 2023, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, Trofimchuk and Go, 2023, Group Processes and Intergroup Relations, and YouGov 2022, What Americans Think of the U.S. Flag in 2021, and YouGov 2022, How Americans View the American Flag and Other Symbolic Flags in 2022. According to Trofimchuk and Go, both parties strongly associated the flag with the Republican Party. However, Democrats associated the American flag more with their own Democrat Party than Republicans associated the flag with the Democrat Party. Democrats are more likely to view the American flag negatively with regard to both effect and concepts compared to Republicans. According to YouGov's 2021 poll, over half of Democrats and Republicans view the American flag as representative of their in-party. Over half of Democrats view the Confederate flag as associated with Republicans, while only a third of Republicans view the Confederate flag as associated with Republicans. According to YouGov's 2022 poll, the majority of Democrats and Republicans have a positive view of the American flag. The American and Betsy Ross flags appear to be the only flags both parties have a positive view of. Again, Trofimchuk and Go, 2023, Group Processes and Intergroup Relations, and YouGov 2022, What Americans Think of the U.S. Flag in 2021, and YouGov 2022, How Americans View the American Flag and Other Symbolic Flags in 2022. Now, Tyler and Iyengar, 2023, American Political Science Review, Learning to Dislike Your Opponents, Political Socialization in the Era of Polarization. Adolescent partisan identification is well established by age 11 in both 1980 and 2019. The learning curve for polarization with respect to trust plateaus by the age of 11 in 2019. This is very unlike the developmental pattern that held in 1980, when early childhood was characterized by blanket positivity toward political leaders and partisanship gradually intruded into the political attitudes of adolescence before peaking in adulthood. Parents and their children agree on party identification far more in 2019 than they did in 1980, and agreement on party identification is a strong predictor of adolescent polarization. Put another way, polarized parents seem to transmit not only their partisanship, but also their animus toward opponents to their children. Again, Tyler and Iyengar, 2023, American Political Science Review, Learning to Dislike Your Opponents, Political Socialization in the Era of Polarization. Now, Tyler and Iyengar, 2023, American Political Science Review, Testing the Robustness of the Ames Feeling Thermometer Indicators of Effective Polarization. The ANS response rate has declined from a high of around 80% in 1964 to just under 50% in 2020. Feeling thermometer effective polarization is 8 to 9 points higher when the ANS survey is conducted online than when the survey is conducted face-to-face. Priming a partisan identity, or the stronger party attachments of those taking the ANS compared to the general population, do not have a substantial impact on feeling thermometer effective polarization. Again, Tyler and Iyengar, 2023, American Political Science Review, Testing the Robustness of the ANS Feeling Thermometer Indicators of Affective Polarization. Now, Van Noort, 2023, Electoral Studies, Republican Party Identification, and Trump's approval rating dropped immediately after the January 6th insurrection, but gradually climbed back to pre-insurrection levels over time. Again, Van Noort, 2023, Electoral Studies. Now, Volkel and Others, 2023, Nature Human Behavior. The three interventions that were attempted were making out-party friendships salient, describing warm political elite relations, and correcting exaggerated misperceptions about the extent of out-party opposition to in-party attempts to pass a policy. All three attempted methods significantly decreased effective polarization as measured through a feeling thermometer. The three interventions found no reductions in support for undemocratic candidates, support for partisan violence, nor prioritizing partisan ends over democratic means. It is suggested that future work that is interested in anti-democratic outcomes measures anti-democratic outcomes, not effective polarization. This stems from its other suggestion, which was that effective polarization interventions should avoid assuming downstream consequences based on these interventions. Again, Volkel and others, 2023, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Wintemute and others, 2023, Injury Epidemiology. 1 in 7 strongly or very strongly agreed that there will be civil war in the next few years. 2/3 of the respondents perceived a serious threat to democracy. Around 90% believe it is very or extremely important for the United States to remain a democracy. Again, Wintemute and others, 2023, Injury Epidemiology. Now, Ang et al., 2022, American Journal of Political Science. Partisan congruence with the White House enhances individuals' perceptions of both national and household economic conditions. Right after a change in power, most people don't see big changes in their household finances or the national economy. But over the next 6 months, views begin to shift, and eventually people from the party that won the White House tend to see the economy more positively than those from the other party. Congruence with the party in the White House affects views of the national economy more than household finances, and Republicans show bigger shifts based on that congruence than Democrats. All of these patterns show up not just after the 2016 election, but also after the 2008 election. Again, Ang et al., 2022, American Journal of Political Science. Now Bale, 2022, Princeton University Press. Individuals use social media platforms as if they were a giant mirror that can help them understand their place within society. However, they are more like prisms that bend and refract one's social environment, distorting their sense of themselves and each other. This social media prism is consequential because, as Bale asserts, individuals perform different identities, observe how others react, and update their presentation of self to make them feel like they belong. When people respond to the other side, like blaming them for issues like immigration, it's often less about changing minds and more about signaling loyalty and bonding with like-minded allies. Most know they won't persuade the other side, no matter the evidence. People who lash out at the other side often feel lonely or powerless in real life. Social media gives them a way to feel seen. Even if only a few others notice, it can give them a sense of purpose, connection, and self-worth. Moderates are about 40% more likely to be harassed online than extremists, with most of the harassment coming from the other side's extremists, though it can also come from within their own party. Some extremists attack moderates, seeing little difference between them and the opposing party, and may even blame them for helping the other party's candidate win. This dynamic can mute moderates and create false polarization, as they become less vocal out of fear of harassment. Meanwhile, those harassed by extremists from the other party often view the entire party through the lens of that extreme individual, amplifying polarization. In fact, people who get their news from social media tend to exaggerate the ideological extremism of the other party far more than those who don't. Further, moderates have more to lose than extremists, as posting about politics can alienate family, friends, or even cost them their job. Extremists, on the other hand, turn to social media for status and bonding, knowing their posts won't change anyone's mind. Again, Bale, 2022, Princeton University Press. Now Barber, 2022, The Journal of Politics. Nominate scores have been around for a while, but more people are using CF scores because they can estimate the ideology of challengers and open seat candidates who never held office, something vote-based measures like Nominate can't do. CF scores also place millions of campaign donors on the same ideological scale, offering a broader view. That said, the two measures can diverge quite a bit, likely because ideology is multifaceted. No one really knows exactly why they differ, but they appear to tap into different latent concepts, at least when it comes to Democrats. Again, Barber, 2022, The Journal of Politics. Now, Bisbee, 2022, Journal of Online Trust and Safety. YouTube users who were more skeptical of the 2020 election's legitimacy were more likely to be recommended content that featured narratives about the legitimacy of the election than those who were less skeptical of the election in November and December of 2020. Again, Bisbee, 2022, Journal of Online Trust and Safety. Now, Card et al., 2022. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. From 1880 until around World War II, congressional and presidential speeches about immigration were mostly negative. But starting in the 1940s, sentiment began to shift. By the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s, the tone in Congress had generally become pro-immigration, and it stayed that way through the 1960s. Starting about 10 years after the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, party differences began to grow. Over time, Republicans have become more negative about immigration, while Democrats have become more positive, especially during the Obama and Trump years. From 2001 to 2020, Republicans often used words that framed immigration as a threat, talking about crime, legality, deficiency, and floods of immigrants. Democrats, by contrast, focused on positive ideas like family, cultural contributions, and victimhood. But way back, from 1880 to 1912, both parties sounded about the same when talking about immigration. Again, Card et al. 2022, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, Cheng 2022, Journal of Banking and Finance. Legislative gridlock creates uncertainty about future laws, making it harder for businesses and investors to invest confidently. This leads to unpredictable stock prices, reduced investment, higher borrowing costs, and slower economic growth. The impact of legislative gridlock depends on political polarization and presidential ideology. Greater polarization in Congress makes gridlock worse by reducing bipartisan cooperation, while strong presidential ideology can weaken gridlock's effect, possibly because the president may act through executive orders instead. Again, Cheng 2022, Journal of Banking and Finance. Now, Diaz and Lelks 2022, American Journal of Political Science. People tend to judge someone's party based on their policy positions. For example, if someone is pro-life, others often assume they're Republican, since that's the Republican stance. But even when someone's views don't match their known party, people still see them through the lens of their party identity, just as a disloyal party member. So, judgments of disloyal party members may be more about group identity than about the issues themselves. Again, Diaz and Lelks, 2022, American Journal of Political Science. Now, Druckmann et al. 2022, the Journal of Politics. Individuals see outpartisans as more ideologically extreme and possessing greater political identity salience than they actually have. As a matter of fact, there is no significant difference between affective polarization ratings when rating those who are ideologically extreme and those who are in the control group, suggesting perceiving out party members as ideologically extreme is the default. There is also some evidence that this is the same for an individual's frequency of political discussion, wherein the default assumption regarding outpartisans is that they discuss politics frequently. This exaggerated assumption is harmful. People judge those who seem more extreme or politically salient more harshly. Again, Druckmann et al., 2022, the Journal of Politics. Now, Fernbach and Van Boven, 2022, Current Opinion in Psychology. Fernbach and Van Boven identify 3 cognitive and affective motivators of false polarization, including categorical thinking, simplification, and anger amplification. Categorical thinking. We sort partisans into rigid groups and often equate them with the most extreme prototypes, ignoring the full spectrum of beliefs. Simplification. We reduce complex policies and motivations to simple binaries, attributing opposing views to ignorance or malicious values, and moralizing debates until they become clashes over sacred rights. Anger amplifies. Anger heightens both categorical thinking and simplification, deepening perceived divides. Again, Fernbach and Van Boven, 2022, Current Opinion in Psychology. Now, Heersink et al., 2022, Political Behavior. Counties that shared the incumbent's partisan identity and faced a natural disaster gave the incumbent a higher two-party vote share than similar counties without a disaster. In contrast, counties with an opposing partisan identity that suffered a disaster gave the incumbent a lower vote share than their non-affected peers. This pattern arises because CO partisans focus on relief efforts and are motivated to support the incumbent, while opponents focus on the disaster itself and turn out to vote against him. Again, Heersink et al., 2022, Political Behavior. Now, Jonke et al., 2022, Political Psychology. Political violence is influenced by a mix of personality traits and group-based perceptions. No single cause stands out. Rather, it's a buildup of small but meaningful risks that help explain why some youth may endorse or engage in political violence. Realistic threat and symbolic threat were the greatest predictors of political violence. How strongly a person identifies with their own group was positively linked to violence. No significant effect was found for self-esteem, intolerance of uncertainty, narcissism, or exposure to intergroup conflict. Other factors like depression, aggression, relative group deprivation, negative intergroup emotions, experiences of discrimination, dissatisfaction with the police, political actors, and institutions, and negative attitudes toward democracy can contribute to political violence outcomes. Empathy is a protective factor, lowering the risk of political violence outcomes. Again, Jonke et al., 2022, Political Psychology. Now, Cacholia and Neuner, 2022, Frontiers in Political Science. Partisanship can be viewed through 2 competing perspectives, the instrumental and the expressive views. The instrumental view sees partisanship as a reflection of an individual's ongoing evaluation of party performance, ideology, and policies. In contrast, the expressive view considers partisanship as an enduring social identity shaped by emotional connections and social categorization, grounded in social identity theory. Positive partisan identity refers to the favoritism or affinity individuals have towards their chosen political party, reflecting the positive feelings and emotional attachment they have for it. Negative partisan identity refers to the animosity or hostility individuals have towards the opposing political party, indicating the strong negative feelings or opposition they hold against it. The dark triad personality traits, partisan identity strength, positive partisan identity, and negative partisan identity, increase the acceptance of political violence. However, priming a positive, negative, or instrumental partisan identity does not influence the acceptance of political violence. Again, Cacholia and Nooner 2022, Frontiers in Political Science. Now, Calmo and Johnson 2022, Journal of Experimental Political Science. The relationship between genetics and political ideology was stronger when political knowledge was higher. For the top fifth in political knowledge, the correspondence between genetics and political ideology was greater than those with less political knowledge. The rationale is as follows: much in the same way that differences in height genetics require adequate nutrition to be fully realized, one's genetics may need sufficient political knowledge to fully realize their effects on one's political ideology. This natural experiment was conducted by utilizing data from the Minnesota Twin Registry, which consists of twins born between 1947 and 1956 and raised together. By comparing the relative similarity of political attitudes between identical twin pairs, who share 100% of their genes, and fraternal twin pairs, who share 50% of their genes on average, researchers could assess the contribution of genetics and environment to political ideology. Again, Calmo and Johnson 2022, Journal of Experimental Political Science. Now, Calmo and Mason 2022, the University of Chicago Press. Both Republicans and Democrats show similar levels of support for political violence, but their motivations differ. Among Republicans, support for political violence is often driven by a desire to preserve existing social hierarchies. In contrast, among Democrats, those who support political violence are more likely motivated by a wish to dismantle biased social hierarchies and push for a more egalitarian society. In the close-ended question, of the 15% who supported political violence, 40% of them said none of the options, like killing, punching, destruction of property, verbal insults, and harassment, were justified. Of those who supported political violence, 46% said that violence should be directed at leaders alone, 25% said both voters and leaders, and 12% said voters only. 20% said neither and may be thinking about property destruction instead. Greater trait aggression, strength of partisan social identity, sexism, moral disengagement, and lower age predicted support for violence. Ideological strength, racism, gender, and education did not predict support for partisan violence. Further, measures of partisan affect and partisan social distance were not correlated with support for violence. Support for violence, if one's in-party candidate lost the election, was greater amongst Democrats when Trump was in office. Support for violence, if one's in-party candidate lost the election, was greater amongst Republicans when Biden was in office. Being racist increased partisan moral disengagement for Republicans, but decreased partisan moral disengagement for Democrats. Being sexist increased partisan moral disengagement for Republicans, but had no effect on moral partisan disengagement for Democrats. The explanation given for this is cross pressures. Republicans tend to be more racist and sexist compared to Democrats, so Democrats being more racist and sexist makes them similar to Republicans, while Republicans being more racist and sexist makes them dissimilar to Democrats. On a 0 to 1 sexism scale, Democrats average 0.3%, while Republicans average 0.6%, showing a clear partisan divide. Interestingly, sexist attitudes differ more by party than by gender. Women score an average of 0.4%, which is only slightly lower than men at 0.5%, indicating that hostile sexism is present across genders but varies more strongly along political lines. Again, Calmo and Mason 2022, the University of Chicago Press. Now, Katsaros et al. 2022, Proceedings of the International AAAI Conference on Web and Social Media. While the majority of prompts for offensive tweets resulted in users sending the tweet as is, 9% of prompted tweets were canceled. In addition, 8% of prompted tweets were revised to have less offensive language. These revisions typically involved the removal of profanity or other attacking language. Reducing the number of offensive tweets that a user sends also reduces the number of offensive tweets that they receive, though not total replies. Individuals assigned to treatment were less likely to compose prompt-eligible offensive tweets throughout the experiment. This represents a broader and sustained change in user behavior and implies that receiving prompts may help users be more aware of avoiding potentially offensive content as they post future tweets. Again, Katsaros et al. 2022, Proceedings of the International AAAI Conference on Web and Social Media. Now, Clark and others, 2022, The Forum. Independent and disgruntled leaners are differentiated based on how they respond to detailed partisan identification scales. First, respondents rate their identification on a 7-point scale about whether they identify as a strong or weak partisan, as an independent leaning to either party, or as an independent with no preference. Then, the leaning independent option is removed and replaced with weakest Democrat and weakest Republican. When the independent option is removed, independent leaners tend to choose independent, while disgruntled leaners, those frustrated with their party, tend to shift toward the weakest partisan options. Independent leaners might be largely satisfied with a particular party, but merely see some intrinsic value in identifying as independent. Disgruntled leaners might have a clear partisan affiliation but are unwilling to express this attachment due to dissatisfaction with the party. Disgruntled leaners display less ideological strength and are more likely to defect from their party when voting when compared to independent leaners. Again, Clark et al., 2022, The Forum. Now, Lee, 2022, Political Behavior. Compared to the control condition, reading an article that portrayed large amounts of polarization had no effects on perceptions of polarization. On the other hand, reading an article that portrayed small amounts of polarization significantly reduced perceptions of polarization. The explanation the author provides is that most Americans already perceive America to be extremely polarized, so increasing this perception is difficult. Lower perceptions of polarization significantly increase generalized trust in the American citizenry, and willingness to trust strangers. Experimentally, those in the less perceived polarization condition were more likely to say that most people in America share similar values and beliefs to them than those in the more polarization and control condition. Again, Lee, 2022, Political Behavior. Now, Mernick et al., 2022, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Correcting one's meta-perceptions about support for and willingness to engage in political violence reduces one's support for and willingness to engage in political violence. The misinformation treatment was more effective for those who had greater initial overestimations and meta-perceptions compared to those who had smaller initial overestimations and meta-perceptions. Of particular note, among those who had initial overestimations that were one standard deviation below the mean, the treatment had no significant effect on shifts in meta-perceptions. The treatment continued to reduce an individual's meta-perceptions of willingness to engage in political violence, an individual's own willingness to engage in political violence 4 weeks after the treatment. Individuals overestimated the extent to which out-partisans and in-partisans supported political violence. The overestimation of support for political violence was larger for the out-partisans than it was for the in-partisans. The overestimation of out-partisans' willingness to engage in offensive violence was much larger than the overestimation of out-partisans' willingness to engage in self-defense violence. At a base level, individuals were actually more willing to engage in self-defense violence than in offensive violence. Again, Mernick et al., 2022, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, Mettler and Brown, 2022, The Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science. From 1952 to 1996, rural and urban voters voted similarly to each other. From 1996 onward, the partisan divide went from being based on North versus South to rural versus urban. By 2020, roughly 2/3 of people who lived in rural areas voted to re-elect President Trump, while just 1/3 of urbanites did. The partisan divide between rural and urban individuals stems from both economic and cultural factors. Economically, urban areas have adapted more successfully to the shift from an industrial to a service-based economy, while rural areas have struggled with job losses due to agribusiness, declines in manufacturing, and technological changes in resource extraction. As a result, areas with high economic growth tend to lean Democratic, while those with low growth lean Republican. Culturally, rural residents often see their geographic location as home, feeling a deep connection and obligation to their communities, which shapes how they interpret politics. The partisan divide between rural and urban individuals may undermine democracy in several ways. First, it removes a once cross-cutting identity, deepening the polarization between Republicans and Democrats. Second, because the U.S. Senate and Electoral College give disproportionate power to rural areas, Republicans can often punch above their weight, as seen in 2000 and 2016, when they won the presidency without the popular vote, and in legislative bodies where they win more seats than votes. Third, rural Americans often feel left behind by economic shifts like deindustrialization and technological change, and they resent urban elites, believing they shape policy without understanding rural life. Many view urban and suburban dwellers as less hardworking and overly supported by government. Political figures like Donald Trump have amplified these grievances, encouraging distrust in democratic norms to secure and maintain power. Again, Mettler and Brown, 2022, The Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science. Now, Mies et al., 2022, Science Advances. 17% of Americans' news diet is biased left or right when consuming news from TV. 4% of Americans' news diet is biased left or right when consuming news online. Television news consumers are several times more likely to maintain their partisan news diets month over month. The authors suggest this happens because the online news environment offers thousands of choices, whereas TV news viewers are made to choose from one of a handful of sources, which, once selected, act like a default choice that must be actively altered. This is concerning given that the partisan TV news audience is growing in absolute terms, even as the entire TV news audience is shrinking. News diets among the TV news audience are much more heavily concentrated on preferred sources, especially partisan sources, compared to news diets in the online audience. For example, most Americans who consume mostly MSNBC rarely consume news from any other source besides CNN, while most Americans who consume mostly Fox News do so at the expense of all other sources. Again, Muse et al. 2022 Science Advances. Now, Mukherjee et al. 2022 Political Communication. The most popular category of public opinion leaders followed on Twitter is in entertainment at around 45%. Political figures and political pundits comprise less than half of that. The median Twitter user followed 10 entertainment accounts, 1 brand account, 1 sports account, 1 political figure, 1 public figure, 0 political pundits, 0 hard news, 0 meme accounts, and 0 organization accounts. The author suggests that the degree to which Twitter is political has likely been overstated in the past. This may be because journalists may be covering more political content from political elites, which distorts perceptions of how political Twitter is. These tweets, although visible to them, are not as organically visible to other Twitter users. Another reason is that individuals perceive non-political content to be political, such as eating at Chick-fil-A. After all, social media affordances may prime personal and social identity characteristics, so that even apolitical content is interpreted to be political by the social media audience. Again, Mukherjee et al. 2022 Political Communication. Now, Ray's 2022 Economic Inquiry. The Shelby County versus Holder 2013 ruling to end pre-clearance requirements for jurisdictions with a history of voting rights violations did not widen the black-white vote gap. Again, Ray's 2022 Economic Inquiry. Now, Shaw et al. 2022 American Politics Research. Canvassing alone had no influence on vote turnout, which contradicts prior research which finds canvassing is effective. The only strategy that appeared to have efficacy was text messaging alone or combining text messaging with other strategies, such as canvassing, digital advertising, and mail. Combining text messaging with these other strategies appeared to be more successful than text messaging alone, and text messaging combined with canvassing had the largest effect. The text treatment sent the text to all individuals at once closer to the election. On the other hand, the canvassing treatment, digital ads, and the mail treatment started earlier and covered a wider time frame than the text treatment. The later timing of the text may have been less likely to be forgotten, leading to greater turnout. Additionally, text messages are difficult to ignore, so their synergistic effects with other strategies may happen because they remind individuals to vote. Again, Shaw et al. 2022 American Politics Research. Now, Sides et al. 2022 American Political Science Review. Televised broadcast campaign advertising matters up and down the ballot, but it has much larger effects in down ballot elections than in presidential elections because it provides new information and changes voters' attitudes about the candidates. This is based on the assumption that voters clearly have less information and weaker opinions about candidates in down ballot races. The primary mechanism for ad effects is persuasion, not the mobilization of partisans. Again, Sides et al. 2022 American Political Science Review. Now, Sides et al. 2022 Princeton University Press. Partisanship and ideological identification played a stronger role in voting in 2020 than in 2016. This trend held across racial groups, with Trump gaining more support among conservatives of all races, and Biden performing better among liberals, helping explain Trump's increased support from Latino and Black voters in 2020. Again, Sides et al. 2022 Princeton University Press. Now, Stroud et al. 2022 Journal of Communication. Motivation is a necessary component of learning, but this motivation need not be intrinsic. Extrinsic motivation, such as the motivation to remain on a radio station or news article because one is forced to, can encourage learning, even when one may not be motivated intrinsically to learn the news for news' sake. In the radio condition, those who selected the music station over the news station tended to change the radio station to another music station when the news break came on. As a result, they showed no improvement in news knowledge compared to those who did not have the news break come on at all. However, those who were forced to listen to the news break showed an improvement in news knowledge compared to those that did not have the news break come on at all. In the newspaper condition, those who selected an entertainment article over the news article clicked next before reading the news sidebar on their entertainment article. They also showed no improvement in news knowledge compared to those without the news sidebar, likely because in one condition they did not read it and in the other condition they could not read it. However, when those in the news article condition were forced to read for 30 seconds, They appeared to read the news sidebar because they showed an improvement in news knowledge compared to the condition without the news sidebar. In the article lead condition, having the lead briefly explain the article increased learning compared to the condition without the lead. This is likely because the information from the title and lead may have been compelling enough to hold their attention, even if they were not interested in the first place. Again, Stroud and others, 2022, Journal of Communication. Now, Stryker et al., 2022, Human Communication Research, and Stryker et al., 2016, Communication Monographs. Using a confirmatory factor analysis based on crowdsourced data, it appears that the three dimensions of incivility are insulting utterances, deception, and behaviors that tend to shut down ongoing and inclusive discussion. The two biggest specific items rated as most uncivil included threatening harm followed by encouraging harm. Even issues like no evidence were considered more uncivil than not and placed under the deception dimension. The only specific item that raters did not overwhelmingly rate as uncivil was attacking issues, which was split. Attacking issues was also the only item not included in the three dimensions of incivility because of how few people thought it was uncivil. The results of Stryker et al. 2022 confirm a prior finding of Stryker et al. 2016, namely that attacking issues is not uncivil, while the many other items brought up were perceived as uncivil. Stryker et al. 2022 used a representative sample of over 2,000, while Stryker et al. 2016 used an undergrad sample of over 1,000. Again, Stryker et al. 2022 Human Communication Research, and Stryker et al. 2016 Communication Monographs. Now, Tornberg, 2022, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Partisan echo chambers are helpful because individuals sort within their local echo chambers. On the other hand, when individuals are exposed to the political outgroup's content, such as through cross-cutting discussion, they sort across partisan lines. The conclusion is that it is not isolation from opposing views that drives polarization, but rather the fact that digital media bring us to interact outside our local bubble. Again, Tornberg, 2022, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, West and Iyengar, 2022, Political Behavior. Priming and individuating identity does not influence effective polarization when using the feeling thermometer or trait evaluations. Again, West and Iyengar, 2022, Political Behavior. Now, Westwood, 2022, Political Behavior. 45% of individuals feel bipartisanship is good, 16% feel bipartisanship is bad, 39% feel neutral toward it. However, 2/3 of respondents cannot define bipartisanship. In a nutshell, constituents do not have a solid understanding of the term bipartisanship, but they do seem to like the term. Presenting a bill as bipartisan, even when only a single opposition member voted for the bill, increases public support by around 21% from the partisan treatment. This is larger than the increase in public support when the bill is reported to garner the support of members of the other party. In a nutshell, this shows that constituents are far more responsive to the assertion of bipartisanship than actual bipartisan votes. Representatives across the ideological spectrum use bipartisan claims. For instance, those at the partisan extremes utilize bipartisanship in their representational strategies at nearly the same levels as moderates. The largest amount of bipartisan talk focuses on bills that advance with less opposition support. This is the inverse of what we would expect if bipartisan rhetoric was predictive of bipartisan action. 7.6% of the 434,000 speeches made on the floor invoked bipartisanship. Again, Westwood 2022, Political Behavior. Now, Westwood and Peterson 2022, Political Behavior. In both the out-race and out-party conditions, being exposed to the negative experience condition increased perceptions of unfairness compared to being exposed to the fairness condition. Further, those who were exposed to a negative experience with the out-race or out-party rated both the out-race and out-party worse with regard to effect than those who had a positive experience. In the out-party condition, there was an effect for race, but the effect for party was greater. In the out-race condition, both out-race and out-party saw a similar decrease in effect. The study also asked individuals to rate immigrants and baseball fans, but did not see a significant effect of the race or party condition on measures of affect toward these individuals. This indicates that the parallel effects between race and partisanship are not because of negativity toward humans or human groups after being in the negative condition, but rather some relationship between race and party. Further, partisanship was randomly assigned in the race condition, and race was randomly assigned in the partisanship condition, ensuring individuals did not assume partisanship from race or race from partisanship. Again, Westwood and Peterson 2022, Political Behavior. Now, Westwood et al. 2022, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Surveys overreport support for political violence because participants tend to answer questions while they are disengaged, leading to random responding, and surveys utilize too many hypothetical questions. Actual support for partisan violence was around 3%, but reported support for partisan violence, according to other surveys, was around 19%. Again, Westwood et al. 2022, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, Alvarez et al., 2021, Social Science Quarterly. The people of Orange County were most confident that their own vote was counted as intended, less confident that votes in OC were counted as intended, even less confident that votes in California were counted as intended, and least confident that votes in the U.S. were counted as intended. At each of these levels, registered Democrats are more confident in the election compared to registered Republicans. Again, Alvarez et al., 2021 Social Science Quarterly. Now, Armley and Enders 2021 Political Science Research and Methods. In the cross-lagged context, greater effective polarization in one's past predicts greater perceived issue polarization in one's future. However, greater perceived issue polarization in one's past does not predict greater affective polarization in one's future. Therefore, perception-correcting interventions meant to address perceived issue polarization may not be treating the root cause of polarized perceptions, which appears to lie in affective polarization. Again, Armley and Enders 2021, Political Science Research and Methods. Now, Gaiety et al., 2021. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. People were matched so that they could exchange views on wealth redistribution policies. Matching participants who shared non-political similarities led to increased feelings of closeness toward the match. Those feelings of closeness in turn predicted openness toward opposing views. Matching participants who shared political similarities also led to increased feelings of closeness toward the match compared to when the other did not share political similarities. Disclosing one's political views may do more harm than good. Interacting with someone with opposite political views decreases closeness much more than interacting with someone with the same political views increases closeness. Exchanging views on wealth redistribution generally increased support for redistributive policies and reduced overall opinion polarization. Again, Gaiety et al., 2021, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, Cassisi 2021, Political Behavior. Partisans animalistically, mechanistically, and blatantly dehumanize the out party more than they do their in party. Greater partisan identity strength and perceived moral distance increases one's partisan dehumanization of the out party. The results are mixed as to whether social distance influences one's partisan dehumanization of the out party. Again, Cassisi 2021, Political Behavior. Now, Chin and Pasek 2021, International Journal of Public Opinion Research. Republicans tend to be more incorrect than Democrats regarding climate change-related questions. Republicans were equally likely to be misinformed, uninformed, and reject the right answers even when they knew the scientific consensus. Therefore, mitigating the partisan gap requires that experts simultaneously provide information for the uninformed, correct the incorrect perceptions of the misinformed, and convince those who knowingly reject the consensus that it is worthy of their belief. Scientific differences in disbelief based on partisanship were contained to climate change and had no effect on other scientific issues, like plate tectonics, light being faster than sound, humans sharing genes with mice, and plants producing oxygen. The authors suggest this implies that focusing on partisan-motivated reasoning may be more fruitful than focusing on correcting disbelief, because reducing the effect of partisan identification may reduce seeking out alternative explanations. Again, Chin and Pasek, 2021, International Journal of Public Opinion Research. Now, Clayton, 2021, SSRN. Amongst weak Republicans, reading about Republican intra-party conflict decreases effect toward the Republican Party, increases effect toward the Democratic Party, and decreases perceived threats posed by the Democratic Party compared to the control. Reading about Republican intra-party conflict has no effect on strong or weak Democrats as well as strong Republicans compared to the control. Highlighting intra-party conflict amongst the Republican Party does not influence beliefs that the two major parties do such a poor job that a third major party is needed. Anti-establishment beliefs. Beliefs that divisions between the parties are decreasing. Beliefs that there are important differences in opinion between the two parties. Beliefs that there are important differences in opinion within a voter's party. Or beliefs about the legitimacy of Joe Biden's win in the 2020 election. Again, Clayton 2021, SSRN. Now, Clayton et al., 2021, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Exposure to Trump tweets about election norm violations decreased trust and confidence in elections among Trump supporters. However, among those who disapproved of Trump, exposure to the same Trump tweets about election norm violations increased trust in elections. Again, Clayton et al., 2021, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, De Francisci Morales et al., 2021, Scientific Reports. In the 2016 election, individuals engaged in more cross-cutting political interactions between the two out-party Reddit communities rather than within-party interactions, thus contradicting the echo chamber narrative. Again, De Francisci Morales et al., 2021, Scientific Reports. Now, Druckmann et al. 2021, Nature Human Behavior. Among Democrats, out-party animosity increases support for COVID-19 policies, while among Republicans, it decreases it. Democrats with higher out-party animosity report engaging in more COVID-19 preventive behaviors, while Republicans show no significant difference based on their levels of out-party animosity. In counties with low amounts of COVID-19 cases, Democrats with high levels of out-party animus exhibit much greater support for COVID-19 combating policies than Republicans with high levels of out-party animus. However, in counties with large amounts of COVID-19 cases, there were no differences for COVID-19 combating policies between Democrats and Republicans, regardless of their levels of out-party animus. Again, Druckmann et al. 2021, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Easton and Holbein, 2021, Journal of Experimental Political Science. Rating an in-partisan increases ratings of attractiveness, willingness to respond to a message, and willingness to be in a relationship compared to rating an out-partisan. Again, Easton and Holbein, 2021, Journal of Experimental Political Science. Now, Enders and Lupton, 2021, Political Science Research and Methods. There is a strong positive relationship between value polarization, which is about differences between an individual and average out-party score on a spectrum from egalitarianism to moral traditionalism, and affective polarization. This relationship is present independent of the effects of sorting and issue polarization, meaning affective polarization is also rooted in deeply held values. Again, Enders and Lupton, 2021, Political Science Research and Methods. Now, Enns and Jardina, 2021, Public Opinion Quarterly. In 2016, Trump both attracted white voters with conservative views on matters of race and immigration, and also transformed some of his supporters' views on these issues. Therefore, the link between Trump's support to white attitudes toward Black Americans and immigrants observed in prior studies is likely due as much to white Trump. Supporters updating their survey responses to report opinions more consistent with Trump's as it is to Trump drawing support from more racially antagonistic white voters. Again, Enns and Jardina, 2021, Public Opinion Quarterly. Now, Grant et al., 2021, PLOS One. In the context of the U.S. 2020 presidential election, Democrats were more confident than were Republicans that both their own and nationwide votes were counted correctly. People have more confidence that their own votes were counted correctly than that nationwide votes were counted correctly. Again, Grant et al., 2021, PLOS One. Now, Gotcha Astrup, 2021, Personality and Individual Differences. Partisan identity strength can increase activism intentions, meaning partisan identity may be a good thing if one's personality makes it so. That one uses partisan identity strength as a positive political engagement motivator, such as for activism instead of as a political violence motivator. Partisan identity strength can increase intentions to engage in political violence, particularly when someone scores high on the dark triad traits. Higher extroversion and neuroticism correlate with greater political violence intentions, while higher agreeableness, openness, and conscientiousness correlate with less political violence intentions. Additionally, higher agreeableness and openness correlate with greater activism intentions. Again, Gotcha Astrup 2021, Personality and Individual Differences. Now Huddy and Yair, 2021, Political Psychology. Reading about political elites from opposite parties acting warm toward each other significantly improves affective polarization. However, reading about political elites compromising on issues had no effect on effective polarization, meaning there is absolutely no indication that reading about political elites compromising has any effect on effective polarization in this study. Again, Huddy and Yair, 2021, Political Psychology. Now, Jarvis, 2021, Routledge. Tea Party-endorsed candidates were both more likely to engage in assaults on the liberal label in their televised political advertising, and less likely to invoke the conservative label than were other Republicans. In this way, the Tea Party offered elements of the Republican Party a way to rebrand themselves, not as members of a conservative movement, but as a group defined in opposition to liberalism. Party cues help candidates to cut the transaction costs of communicating with the electorate, as the party label contains a great deal of performance and policy relevant information in a neat package that, at least in the context of paid television advertising, is relatively cheap. However, using party cues brings with it the very real possibility of enhancing conformity costs if there are points on which the candidate would like to differentiate or distance himself or herself from the party. Further, shifts in the electoral value of a party's brand name can make candidates running in years where the national tide appears to be turning against their party reluctant to embrace such labels. The supply-side perspective on the provision of cues by elites suggests that voters can only use party or ideology cues to shape their attitudes toward the candidates if they are paying attention to what is going on in the informational environment, and the candidates are utilizing partisan and ideological labels in their campaign communications. If candidates do not use partisan and ideological cues in their campaign communications, Although theoretically, voters can always access those cues, this does not typically happen. Partisans largely did not differ in their open-ended descriptions of acts of political incivility, suggesting they may view the same acts as uncivil. However, the examples they used were partisan. Democrats tended to mention examples of Republicans behaving badly, and Republicans tended to mention examples of Democrats behaving badly. This suggests that incivility may be perceived in a partisan manner. In the experimental context, out-partisans were perceived as most uncivil, and in-partisans were perceived as least uncivil, despite being presented with similar examples. Participants, on average, clicked more often on news stories depicting civil interactions among lawmakers, and they clicked least on the news stories depicting incivility. Again, Jarvis 2021 Routledge, now Kings et al. 2021 Public Opinion Quarterly. At higher levels of effective polarization, partisans supported constitutional protections less when they had an in-party president in office, and supported constitutional protections more when they had an out-party president in office. Again, Kings et al. 2021 Public Opinion Quarterly, now Kronfeldner 2021 Routledge. Dehumanization often builds on a contrast between animals and humans, or a contrast between machines and humans. However, a third ontological contrast is the one between demons, angels, or gods versus humans. Again, Kronfeldner 2021 Routledge. Now Kubin et al. 2021. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. When individuals imagined someone they were having a conversation with using personal experiences, there was less respect, decreased perceptions of rationality, and a decreased desire to discuss a political topic with another compared to if they were to use facts. However, in reality, interactions with individuals where a personal story was used resulted in greater respect, greater perceptions of rationality, and an increased willingness to interact compared to the fact condition. Personal experiences were only more effective than facts when discussing moral topics like gun policy. Personal experiences were similar in effectiveness to facts when discussing non-moral topics like blender preferences. Relevant and harm-based personal experiences were significantly better at increasing perceived rationality and respect than non-relevant and non-harm-based personal experiences. Again, Kubin et al. 2021, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, Lees and Sakara, 2021, Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B, and Moorburg et al. 2020. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Both in-party and out-party perceptions are overly pessimistic with respect to how much one's in-party and out-party disliked, opposed, and found politically unacceptable the other party's actions. One's rank order perception of the in-party tends to be more accurate than one's meta-perception of the out-party. This accuracy of the rank order is based on the participants' evaluation of the in or out group compared to true scores of that group. Further, according to Moorburg et al., there is about twice as much perceived negativity in meta-perceptions compared to how much there actually is. This is harmful because an individual's meta-perceptions, particularly meta-prejudice and meta-dehumanization, are independently associated with the desire for social distance from members of the out party and support for policies that harm the country and flout democratic norms to favor the in party. Again, Lees and Sakara, 2021, Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B. Now, Martharis et al. 2021 Political Behavior. Around 80% of individuals blatantly dehumanized out partisans, with the mean score on the dehumanization measure being 34 out of 100. 59% of individuals subtly dehumanized out partisans. This indicates that, perhaps counterintuitively, partisans are far more willing to blatantly dehumanize than to deprive their opponents of these particular human traits. These gaps are more than twice the mean dehumanization differences found for Muslims and more than 4 times the gap for Mexican immigrants. The tendency to dehumanize appears to increase sharply at the very top of the affective polarization scale. Only the most extremely effectively polarized individuals appear comfortable using the full range of the blatant dehumanization scale. While a large number of subjects were willing to respond with large feeling thermometer differences, they were much less willing to use the full dehumanization scale. These results suggest that the extremely effectively polarized may be qualitatively different from those who are less polarized. When presented with information about misdeeds, partisans typically perceive out-party members as animal-like, but are prone to forgive the transgressions of fellow party members. Stronger partisan identification correlates with more dehumanization of out-partisans, but this relationship is extremely underwhelming. Having a more fixed, as opposed to fluid, worldview encourages one to dehumanize the out-party more. This effect was stronger for Republicans with a fixed worldview than Democrats with a fixed worldview. Greater dehumanization of out-partisans is related to greater partisan-motivated reasoning. Again, Martharis et al., 2021, Political Behavior. Now Myrick, 2021, International Organization. External threats, for the most part, do not unite partisans and reduce polarization. There is some evidence that if an external threat is presented without any partisan cues, it can unite partisans, and if there are any partisan cues, like the attribution of a source to a partisan, those effects dissipate. The evidence is more consistent with the idea that polarization over domestic policy has spilled into foreign affairs. This logic is related to the concept of conflict extension in American politics, a process in which issue areas that cut across party lines are gradually absorbed into the partisan divide by party activists. Therefore, new threats introduced in already polarized contexts are likely to sow greater division. Again, Myrick 2021 International Organization, now Parco Z and Jarvis 2021 American Behavioral Scientist. The most common response, encompassing 37% of individuals, was about the frustration that elections are predetermined, which is to say that electoral participation does not matter because outcomes are predestined, already decided, and set in advance. The authors found it intriguing that the most common response to the prompt, "When people say that elections are rigged, what do you think they mean?" addressed a sense of power and not the politics surrounding or the safety of elections. They further suggested that the dominant sense of what rigged means is that the power to decide elections resides with others. There were partisan differences with respect to where agency was placed for rigged elections. Many Democrats expressed how rigged elections were caused by and benefited political elites, whereas Republicans felt that everyday people may have cheated, placing agency with everyday people. Again, Parco Z and Jarvis 2021 American Behavioral Scientist. Now, Peterson et al. 2021 Political Science Research and Methods. Although the authors suggest that absolute levels of partisan selective exposure are modest, partisan selective exposure has increased over time from 2009 to 2016. Of the top 10 most viewed news sources, 8 of 10 have a clearly partisan audience. For example, Fox News has only a 5% Democratic share, and The Washington Post has only a 13% Republican share. When information is relevant to the election, partisans' news choices become more divergent. The increase in partisan selective exposure is attributable less to the supply of distinctively biased content and more to the politicization of source credibility. For example, Trump saying CNN is fake news. Again, Peterson et al. 2021 Political Science Research and Methods. Now, Quiros Ramirez et al. 2021 Humanities and Social Sciences Communications. Participants could reliably tell which 3D body shapes represented Republican or Democrat stereotypes, showing that body-based partisan stereotypes exist. Republicans and Democrats saw Republicans as fatter than Democrats. However, self-identified Republicans have a mental representation of Republicans that is skinnier than self-identified Democrats' mental representation of Republicans. This suggests that people attribute more positive body shape characteristics, for example, thinness, to their own peer group. Again, Quiros Ramirez et al. 2021 Humanities and Social Sciences Communications. Now, Rajadasinghan et al. 2021 International AAI Conference on Web and Social Media. Around 13% of content on Reddit is political, and half of that comes from non-political subreddits. Cross-partisan discussions are significantly less toxic on non-political subreddits, at 25% toxicity, than those in political subreddits at 30% toxicity. This holds both for political and non-political content. There was a main effect of political discussion being more toxic than non-political discussion. Again, Rajadasinghan et al. 2021 International AAAI Conference on Web and Social Media. Now Rathje 2021 Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Posts on Facebook or Twitter that mention the out party were shared or retweeted around twice as often as posts about the in party. Each individual term referring to the political out party increased the odds of a social media post being shared by 67%, consistently emerging as the strongest and by far the most substantial predictor of shares and retweets when compared to moral or negative language. Out party language was also a strong predictor of more comments. Language about the out party was a very strong predictor of more angry reactions, and language about the in party was a strong predictor of more love reactions, reflecting in party favoritism and out party derogation. Out party language was around twice as strong a predictor of angry reactions as in-group words were of love reactions. Again, Rathje 2021 Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now Recker 2021 Public Understanding of Science. The anti-science ideology of the Republican Party is a cause for ideologically motivated polarization over science. The Republican Party's association with anti-science ideology allows effective polarization to psychologically motivate the rejection of scientific claims driven by partisan identity and the avoidance of cognitive dissonance with that identity's scientific stance. Again, Recker 2021 Public Understanding of Science. Now, Rudolph and Hetherington 2021 International Journal of Public Opinion Research. Individuals are more trusting of in-party members than out-party members in both the political and non-political contexts. The magnitude of the trust gap was almost twice as large for the political individuals as the non-political individuals. Polarized trust in non-political settings is more a reflection of in-group love than of out-group hate. While polarization in political settings reflects both in-party love and out-party hate is the more dominant source of polarization. Again, Rudolph and Hetherington, 2021, International Journal of Public Opinion Research. Now, Ruggeri et al., 2021, Nature Human Behavior. Across America and 25 countries, individuals hold more negative meta-perceptions of the out-group than the out-group's actual perceptions of the in-group. Correcting meta-perceptions reduces negative out-group attributions. Again, Ruggeri et al., 2021, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Gaiety, 2021, British Journal of Political Science. Observing greater incivility between political elites reduced trust in politicians, had no effect on attitude polarization, and increased effective polarization. On the other hand, observing greater issue polarization between politicians had no effect on trust in politicians, but increased attitude polarization and increased effective polarization. Put another way, incivility uniquely worsened trust in politicians and issue polarization worsened attitude polarization between parties. Further, incivility appears to have no effect compared to the control condition, but civility increases trust in politicians and reduces effective polarization. This may indicate that individuals assume politicians are uncivil in the absence of information suggesting otherwise. Again, Gaiety, 2021, British Journal of Political Science. Now, Taryn and Borge-Bravo, 2021, Review of Communication Research. Studies that use digital trace data tend to find support for echo chambers at some level. Studies that use self-reports of social media activity tend not to find support for echo chambers. The article states that both have their weaknesses. The article does suggest using both in tandem is a good idea. Trace data, which tends to rely on things like an API, cannot get individual-level data. Additionally, it cannot provide data about an individual's behavior on other platforms or their offline activity. On the other hand, self-reports tend to have smaller sample sizes and are prone to measurement issues like social desirability or the inability to retrospectively recall one's media engagement accurately. Again, Taryn and Borge-Bravo, 2021, Review of Communication Research. Now, Van Duyn, 2021, Oxford University Press. Over 20% of individuals in America say they feel the need to hide their politics from others. Around 10% of American residents joined a private group to secretly discuss politics in person or online in the past 2 years. Note that this study was published in a book in 2021. The value of secrecy is what people use it for, whether they use it as a peaceful tool for protection and progress, or as a tool for indignation and violence. Growing hostility and prejudice between partisans have made political identity a risky one. In turn, managing the publicness of that identity has become more important not just to those on the fringe, but those in the mainstream as well. When people use secrecy to come together, it can give them support, courage, and a channel forward. On the other hand, seeking out or creating groups of like-minded people can also be a bad thing. In addition to the insurrectionists who use closed Facebook groups to organize violent crimes against the country, there are a number of other examples of how secrecy can hurt progress and democracy. Networked science posits that individuals experience political opposition in a part of their social network, intentionally conceal their political beliefs from that part of their network, and express their political beliefs away from that part of their network. Put another way, networked silence means that people can appear silent in one context, such as the women in Texas who withhold their beliefs from their neighbors, and expressive in another, like the same women who robustly discuss, debate, and engage with political topics together behind closed doors. The novel part of this study is that networked silence is no longer reserved for those from marginal social identities or political identities, but from mainstream ones as well, as showcased in the group followed in this study, which was comprised of white, affluent, moderate liberal women. Again, Van Duyn, 2021, Oxford University Press. Now, Albertson and Geiler, 2020, Research in Politics. For Democrats, the claim that Russia intended to rig the election increased their concerns about fraud, but the claim that their own party might rig the election had no effect. For Republicans, the claim that Democrats would rig the election made them more likely to believe fraud was likely, whereas the claim that Russia would interfere did not change their perceptions. Again, Albertson and Geiler, 2020, Research in Politics. Now, Anderson et al., 2020, PLOS 1. Voters in state legislative elections punish occurrences of budget gridlock. The effect is entirely driven by lower re-election rates for members of the majority party in the legislature. Non-incumbent members of the majority party also suffer electorally and are less successful in defeating minority party incumbents when the state budget has been delayed. Although the effect is smaller than for incumbent majority party members, This is consistent with a key assertion in influential theories of party organization, namely that a poor legislative performance hurts the brand of the majority party in the legislature to the detriment of all candidates running under that brand. There is no evidence that voters base their judgment of who is responsible for budget gridlock on the party affiliation of the governor. Again, Anderson et al., 2020, PLOS 1. Now, Blum, 2020, the University of Chicago Press. A faction is programmatic if demands require a renegotiation of the coalition. If a programmatic faction is cooperative with the party, like the Christian right, it is a consociational faction. However, if a programmatic faction is not cooperative with the party, it is an insurgent faction. Blum states that the Tea Party is an insurgent faction. Insurgent factions are characterized by their willingness to destabilize their host parties in order to seize control of them. Factions are unique in two respects from interest groups and movements. They need a host party in order to exist, and they use the machinery of the host party to effect change. In contrast, interest groups and movements can and often do exist independently of a host party, and do not typically have direct access to a party's electoral machinery. Again, Blum 2020, the University of Chicago Press. Now Clark 2020, American Journal of Political Science. Party subbrands have distinct voting patterns from others in their party, and market these voting patterns to garner a donor base distinct from others within their party. Party sub-branding is effective only when factions possess organizational features that induce coordinated and disciplined position-taking like whips, PACs, and membership restrictions. In this sense, factions must build institutions that mirror political parties. Again, Clark, 2020, American Journal of Political Science. Now, Ecker and others, 2020, British Journal of Psychology. Both retractions, which involved stating the misinformation with a red false graphic below it, and refutations, which involved highlighting why the false claim was false, reduced belief in a false claim compared to the control, suggesting there was no backfire effect of exposing one to a false claim they may not have been exposed to otherwise when in the process of attempting to defeat that false claim. Further, refutations were more effective if participants were previously exposed to the misinformation, which runs counter to the assumption that greater familiarity with misinformation leads to greater endorsement of said misinformation. Refutations were also more effective than retractions after a week, but there was no difference in their effectiveness after a day. Again, Ecker et al., 2020. British Journal of Psychology. Now Fangmeyer et al., 2020. Couple and Family Psychology Research and Practice. Being a Republican is related to higher levels of commitment and adjustment, both qualities related to increased relationship quality. For commitment, the difference was only significant for relationships where individuals were not yet engaged or married, meaning they planned to propose or were still in the dating phase. Again, Fangmeyer et al., 2020, Couple and Family Psychology Research and Practice. Now Groenendijk et al., 2020, The Journal of Politics. Moderate partisans dislike their own party more over time, while extreme partisans either feel similarly toward their party or like it more. While the average partisan has become effectively polarized over time, the modal partisan has not, reporting similar feelings toward both parties. This suggests that the existing literature is right to point out the growing mean distance between partisans' feelings toward the two parties, but this pattern is clearly not representative of all partisans. Again, Groenendijk et al., 2020, The Journal of Politics. Now, Guess et al., 2020, Nature Human Behavior. There was much more misinformation on conservative websites overall compared to liberal websites. Articles on untrustworthy conservative websites represented 5% of people's news diets compared with only 1% for liberal websites. Again, Guess et al., 2020, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Kincaid and Leckrone, 2020, State and Local Government Review. After a burst of bipartisan legislation in response to COVID-19's first surge, the comparatively weak US follow-through was not due to structural flaws in federalism, but to partisan fractures that blocked a cooperative federalism response. Again, Kincaid and Leckrone, 2020, State and Local Government Review. Now, Lees and Sakara, 2020, Nature Human Behavior. Partisans hold more negative meta-perceptions of the outgroup than the outgroup's perceptions of the in-group. Correcting meta-perceptions reduces negative out-party obstruction motive attributions. The more inaccurate the meta-perception of an individual was, the more the correction of the meta-perception reduced negative out-party attributions. Again, Lees and Sakara, 2020, Nature Human Behavior. Now, Mertens et al., 2020, Journal of Environmental Psychology. Exposure to a consensus message, such as by saying that 97% of climate scientists have concluded that human-caused climate change is happening, increases perceived scientific consensus. This effect of an increase in scientific consensus held up after 1 week, but was only around half as strong at the 1 week mark. Being exposed to misinformation 1 week after the consensus message eliminated the effect of the consensus message if there was no inoculation. However, inoculation preserved the positive effect of the consensus message on perceived scientific consensus. The effects applied regardless of one's ideology or partisan affiliation, although Republicans exhibited greater changes in a similar direction to Democrats. Again, Mertens et al., 2020, Journal of Environmental Psychology. Now, Mudiman et al., 2020, Communication Research. Individuals selected and interacted with news depicting politicians as respectful and willing to compromise more often than those who did not. All in all, civility increased selection and engagement with articles. The two rationales the author provides for why this research does not support prior literature is that negativity and positivity are conceptualized differently in nearly all of the studies in prior literature regarding the impact of negativity on news engagement, and that the political context of the news content may influence engagement with positive and negative information. For instance, in the current study, the two contexts, Congress and immigration reform, were among the most important problems that U.S. residents said the country faced during the time of data collection. Again, Mudiman et al., 2020, Communication Research. Now, Peterson et al., 2020, The Journal of Politics. A longitudinal survey of individuals from 1965 to 1997, which involved surveying individuals from when they were aged 18 to 50, found that around 75% of participants did not change their ideological issue positions. However, among those whose attitudes did shift, they were 2.5 times as likely to move in a conservative direction as opposed to a liberal direction. In a nutshell, most individuals' ideological positions stay the same over their lifetime, but when they tend to change in a conservative direction. Again, Peterson et al., 2020, The Journal of Politics. Now, Roulet, 2020, Stanford University Press. There are various motivations for issuing negative social evaluations. One motivation for issuing negative social evaluations is to motivate another to adopt one's values. For instance, activists stigmatize Chick-fil-A for their anti-LGBTQ stance, in order to motivate them to change their values to a more LGBTQ-friendly outlook. Another motivation for issuing negative social evaluations is to get revenge on another, or to see them suffer, to make oneself feel less inferior in social comparisons, or feel a sense of power. For instance, leaving a poor review on a business may make someone feel more powerful than having a bad experience and being able to do nothing about it. Some may receive negative social evaluations because of genuine deviance, where they are different from others in ways they cannot control, like for race, sex, and height. Some may receive negative social evaluations because of voluntary deviance, where they are different from others in ways they can control, although whether they truly can control this or not is disputed. Motivations for politicians to be controversial and divisive include garnering more attention, as well as communicating how they differ from another candidate or party, through the dissent of that very candidate or party, demarcating themselves from the out party in a more visible way to voters. Again, Roulet, 2020, Stanford University Press. Now, Sides et al., 2020, British Journal of Political Science. Across different measures of ideological extremity, primary voters are no more ideologically extreme than general election voters who identified with that party or voted for its presidential candidate. This finding holds in primaries in presidential election years and primaries in non-presidential years. This finding also holds in open, semi-closed, and closed primaries. Primary voters are more interested in the campaign than general election voters who identified with that party or voted for its presidential candidate. This study uses data from 2008, 2010, 2012, and 2014. The current study uses validated voter turnout measures, while studies that have claimed that primary voters are more ideologically extreme have used self-reported voter turnout measures. Again, Sides et al., 2020, British Journal of Political Science. Now, Stanley and others, 2020, Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. People assume that their ideological opponents are more likely to lack good reasons for their positions compared to their ideological allies. Further, the more people thought their opponents did not have good reasons for their views, the more likely they were to see them as unintelligent and lacking moral character. When participants were presented with reasons supporting the opposing view, they were less likely to perceive their opponents as lacking intelligence compared to when they were presented with reasons supporting their own view or when presented with no reasons at all. In some cases, being presented with reasons for the other side can make people view their opponents as more moral compared to if there were no reasons presented. Again, Stanley and others, 2020, Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. Now, Stroud et al., 2020, Digital Journalism. Downloading and turning on push notifications from news sources, such as CNN and BuzzFeed, increases the usage of the news app compared to if the app is downloaded but push notifications are disabled. Knowledge of the contents of the push notifications significantly improved when CNN was the app used, but not when BuzzFeed was the app used. Again, Stroud et al., 2020, Digital Journalism. Now, Tan, 2020, Cognella Academic Publishing. The conceptual differences between prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination are that prejudice speaks to affect like anger or disgust. Stereotypes speak to characteristics like lazy or dirty, and discrimination speaks to behavior like avoiding and violence. The relationships between prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination are weak. This may indicate that stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination are each influenced by a number of social and environmental factors that may be operating independently of each other. Again, Tan 2020, Cognella Academic Publishing. Now, Wojcicki and Warner 2020, Political Communication. The impact of reading about positive intergroup contact had some benefits relative to the control with respect to social distance, but reading about cooperative intergroup contact had marginally more benefits. Reading about negative intergroup contact, no direct effects on any measures of out-party relations compared to the control. Imagining positive or cooperative interaction had no positive effect on out-party relations, and, if anything, had a negative effect. Again, Wojcicki and Warner 2020, Political Communication. Now Shu et al. 2020, Cognition and Emotion. Trait disgust encourages a generalized search for order, which in turn encourages the endorsement of political positions that aim to maintain societal order, which would be conservatism. Disgust-sensitive people extend their preference for order in the physical environment, such as tidying up one's room, to the socio-political environment, such as strengthening traditional norms. Again, Yu et al. 2020, Cognition and Emotion. Now, Daniller and Mutz 2019, Public Opinion Quarterly. Losing an election does not necessarily decrease one's perceptions of election integrity. Less than winning increases one's election integrity. However, repetitive losses increase citizens' sensitivity to loss. They experience greater declines in electoral legitimacy as disappointment after disappointment convinces them that the game is rigged. On the other hand, repeated victories for one party produce diminishing returns, because winning does not represent a change from the status quo. Again, Daniller and Mutz 2019, Public Opinion Quarterly. Now, Druckmann and Lewandowski 2019, Public Opinion Quarterly. Participants think of party elites when prompted to indicate effect toward a political party. This may impact measurements because individuals feel more negatively toward elites than voters. Kingset 2021 did the same thing but with a within-subjects design. He found similar results to that of Druckmann and Lewandowski 2019. Trait measures, trust measures, and thermometer measures tend to strongly correlate, but social distance does not. This may be because it is unique in that it is not a feeling toward an outgroup, but rather a willingness to interact with those from the outgroup. Again, Druckmann and Lewandowski 2019, Public Opinion Quarterly. Now, Iyengar et al. 2019 Annual Review of Political Science. Effective polarization throughout the years in the Ains is driven more by outgroup hate than in-group love. Again, Iyengar and others 2019 Review, Annual Review of Political Science. Now, Gaiety et al. 2019 Journal of Communication. Increasing the Twitter character length increased the average tweet length, led to less uncivil political discussions, promoted a greater use of facts and data to support arguments, and encouraged more constructiveness in a user's writing. Again, Gaiety et al. 2019 Journal of Communication. Now, Masuo et al. 2019 Social Media plus Society. A problem with incivility is that nobody really agrees on what incivility is, even in academic circles. A major cleavage is whether incivility and mere impoliteness are synonyms or separate concepts. Incivility can also be a good thing under certain circumstances. For instance, it can be confused for passionate engagement, used to push against the status quo and encourage media coverage of this action against the status quo, and even bond with others through social relationships. Again, Masuyo et al. 2019 Social Media plus Society. Now, Tracy et al. 2019 Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Consuming antiemetic ginger reduced feelings of disgust toward examples of non-moral and moral purity-based activity. These results did not hold outside the purity-based conditions. This was most likely because harm, care, fairness, loyalty, or authority violations did not produce the same physiological disgust and nausea that purity-based moral and purity-based non-moral activity did, but were instead rooted in other emotions like anger, sadness, or happiness. The results of this study are from the antiemetic properties of ginger, because both capsules were coated with a small amount of ginger because they could not get the slight ginger taste from the ginger capsule out. Particularly, the results are from ginger's influence on nausea or nausea-based disgust, because that is the only emotion ginger consumption influenced. Again, Tracy et al., 2019, Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Now, Aller and Sud 2018, the Journal of Politics. Individuals tend to misperceive the demographic characteristics of party members, and these misperceptions place partisans into party stereotypical groups more often. The misperceptions of the out party are larger than that of the in party, although there are still stereotypic misperceptions of both the in and out parties. The more interested one was in politics, the more misperceptions one had of the out party makeup. When the actual demographic characteristics of party members are presented, out-party animosity is reduced. Correcting misperceptions most strongly affects the partisan sentiments of the most misinformed. Further, when people learned the true makeup of the other party, they were less likely to think its members hold extreme views on issues like taxes, abortion, gay rights, and race. Again, Aller and Sud, 2018, The Journal of Politics. Now Bale et al., 2018. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Republicans who were randomly assigned to follow the liberal Twitter bot became significantly and substantially more conservative compared to a control. Democrats who were randomly assigned to follow the conservative Twitter bot trended toward becoming more liberal, although this effect was not significant. Compliance with the treatment appeared to increase the effect of the treatment, with Democrats indicating greater compliance becoming more liberal and Republicans indicating greater compliance becoming more conservative. Again, Bale et al., 2018, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now Carlin and Love, 2018, British Journal of Political Science. Killing Osama bin Laden significantly and substantially increased outpartisan trust. This study compared results before and after the killing of Osama bin Laden. Again, Carlin and Love, 2018, British Journal of Political Science. Now Druckmann et al., 2018, American Journal of Political Science. Those who watch partisan media and discuss end up no more or less polarized than those who only discuss with those who watch partisan media, indicating one does not need to watch partisan media to become more ideologically polarized. Conversations in politically heterogeneous groups result in less attitude polarization than conversations in politically homogeneous groups, maybe because claims are more accepted and uncontested in homogeneous groups. This effect is present regardless of whether one is exposed to partisan media and then discusses or is not exposed to partisan media and discusses. Again, Druckmann et al., 2018, American Journal of Political Science. Now, Hart, 2018, Cambridge University Press. Hart suggests that letters to the editor, such as to the editor of the New York Tribune, will continue because of two reasons. The first is that the American people have always had fundamental disagreements with one another. The second is that the American people cannot keep quiet. Hart also argues that politics never stops by saying democracy is an unsteady form of government shot through with contrary ideas, leading to disputes over money, power, and human rights. Every Democrat knows what democracy means until he or she meets another Democrat. Then they argue, sometimes find a resolution, and then argue about something else. Again, Hart, 2018, Cambridge University Press. Now, Iyengar et al., 2018, The Journal of Politics. Family partisan agreement has increased by 8% between 1965 and 2015. This increase is due to selection, not convergence. We can infer this because time married did not influence the amount of political agreement a couple expressed in a linear regression. Also, couples from 2014 who were just married expressed more partisan agreement with their spouse than those who were also just married in 1973. Again, Iyengar et al., 2018, The Journal of Politics. Now, Clark et al., 2018, Public Opinion Quarterly. When a parent knew the person their child was marrying had a low salience outpartisan identity, it reduced unhappiness with that outcome compared to the high salience and undisclosed salience conditions. Again, Clark et al., 2018, Public Opinion Quarterly. Now Lewandowski, 2018, Public Opinion Quarterly. The partisan ambivalence treatment and the self-affirmation treatment had no effect on effective polarization compared to the control group. Interestingly, while 88% complied with the self-affirmation treatment, only 38% complied with the partisan ambivalence treatment. The partisan ambivalence treatment asked participants to write 2 things you like about the out party and dislike about the in party. Some said things like, "Nothing, or are you kidding me?" The ambivalence prime decreased effective polarization only for those who were more ideologically moderate, not for those who were ideologically extreme. This may have to do with the relationship between being a strong partisan and a reduced compliance with the partisan ambivalence treatment compared to more moderate partisans. Again, Lewandowski, 2018, Public Opinion Quarterly. Now, Lewandowski, 2018, The Journal of Politics. Priming an American identity experimentally or naturally through proximity to July 4th reduces negative out-party affect. There was no significant difference in out-party negative trait evaluations, but there was an increase in out-party positive trait evaluations. There was also an increase in perceived out-party Americanness. Strength of partisanship and sordidness increased negative out-party affect. This effect is additive and does not influence the relationship of the American prime on out-party affect. Again, Lewandowski, 2018, The Journal of Politics. Now, Mason, 2018, The University of Chicago Press. There are reasons that parties are good. For instance, parties serve as an important heuristic whereby the electorate, which includes many individuals who are most likely not as engaged in, politics as they need to be to make nuanced decisions, can make voting decisions based on what they believe each party stands for. However, parties can be bad. For instance, Mason argues that parties become irresponsible when they send partisans into action for the purposes of winning, as opposed to the greater good. Mason is concerned that as identities become increasingly linked with a party, individuals will no longer have opinions on policy independent of their party, and think in terms of their party only. Again, Mason 2018, the University of Chicago Press. Now, McConnell et al. 2018, American Journal of Political Science. In the context of receiving and giving donations, 3/4 of individuals tend to pick the $3 to them option over the $6 to them, with $4 being paid to the out party option. This was significantly higher than the geographical condition, where the money would be donated to those in the east or west part of the U.S. from which the person was not from. Again, McConnell et al. 2018, American Journal of Political Science. Now, Settle 2018, Cambridge University Press. It is important to consider implicitly political content when examining political content on social media, because many individuals may consider these topics political. For instance, Chick-fil-A, hybrid cars, and gun racks, although not classified as explicitly political, were perceived as yes or maybe political by the majority of raters, although in no instance did a majority of raters say yes political. Adding a source cue, such as Fox News, Huffington Post, or USA Today, increases the likelihood that one perceives implicitly political news to be political. This is notable because, as the authors state, many sources that are circulated have a news source attached to it. Individuals were willing to make a judgment about the user's partisanship based solely upon a single piece of content that the user posted the vast majority of the time. Strong, weak, and leaning Republicans and Democrats were identified accurately on a 3-point partisan scale the majority of the time. However, only 10% of partisan leaners were identified accurately. This indicates individuals rarely assumed individuals were independent, indicating they could not recognize a lack of partisan identity. Again, Settle 2018, Cambridge University Press. Now, Wojcicki and Garrett 2018, Human Communication Research. For undocumented immigration opposers, priming national identity increases negativity toward undocumented immigrants. For immigration supporters, no such effect was reported. Although individuals against immigration read twice as many anti-immigration articles than pro-immigration articles, and spend twice as much time on those articles, the results found for priming a national identity hold up when individuals are forcibly exposed to pro- or anti-attitudinal articles. Again, Wojcicki and Garrett 2018, Human Communication Research. Now, Huber and Malhotra 2017, The Journal of Politics. Shared political affiliation increases desire to date, respond to another, long-term dating, belief they share values, and desire to be friends, while having no effect on attractiveness. However, if both individuals who match are not interested in politics, there is no difference in their liking of a profile who likes politics versus one who does not like politics. Also, individuals seek out those who have homogeneous views with them online more than would be expected by chance. Again, Huber and Malhotra 2017, The Journal of Politics. Now, Carlson et al. 2017, European Journal of Communication. Trench warfare dynamics describe a scenario where people engage in debates with those holding opposing views online, but instead of changing their opinions, their initial beliefs are reinforced. This differs from the concept of echo chambers, which emphasize isolation from opposing views. Again, Carlson et al. 2017, European Journal of Communication. Now, Lelkis and Westwood 2017, The Journal of Politics. Higher levels of effective polarization are strongly related to quashing an article hostile to the in party, but not to promoting an article hostile to the out party. When deciding between hiring a less qualified in partisan and a more qualified out partisan, a bit over half preferred the less qualified in partisan. Greater effective polarization made it more likely for individuals to select someone from the in party and exclude someone from the out party. Again, Lelkis and Westwood, 2017, The Journal of Politics. Now, Gear, 1988, American Journal of Political Science. The party following is more better educated, better paid, and more ideologically extreme. This finding stands in contrast to the fears that primary voters are more ideologically extreme than the party following. The rationale provided is that older voters, who are more moderate, tend to also be primary voters. Again, Gear, 1988, American Journal of Political Science. Now, Cox et al., 1984, American Psychologist. High social density refers to a large number of people. High spatial density refers to a low amount of space. Spatial density does not seem to be as important a factor as is commonly believed to produce negative effects. Comparisons of 1- and 2-person units that varied widely in space did not reveal any consistent negative effects related to reduced space. However, social density is related to increased rates of death, suicide, disciplinary infractions, and psychiatric commitment. For instance, placing smaller but individual privacy cubicles in open dormitories can ameliorate and even eliminate negative effects. A posited theory is that the greater privacy or the perceptions of environmental control in areas with low social density may be leading to these positive consequences. Again, Cox et al., 1984, American psychologist. Now, Calhoun, 1973, Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. The takeaway from Universe 25 is that the results obtained in Universe 25 should be obtained when customary causes of mortality become markedly reduced in any species of mammal, like humans, whose members form social groups. Reduction of bodily death culminates in the survival of an excessive number of individuals who have developed the potentiality for occupying the social roles characteristic of the species. Within a few generations, all such roles in all physical space available to the species are filled. At this time, the continuing high survival of many individuals to sexual and behavioral maturity culminates in the presence of many young adults capable of involvement in appropriate species-specific activities. However, there are few opportunities for fulfilling these potentialities. In seeking such fulfillment, they compete for social role occupancy with the older established members of the community. This competition is so severe that it simultaneously leads to the nearly total breakdown of all normal behavior by both the contesters and the established adults of both sexes. Normal social organization, also referred to as the establishment, breaks down. Again, Calhoun, 1973, Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. Now, Allport, 1954, Addison Wesley. Allport states that an in-group could not be perceived without an out-group. However, Allport emphasizes that the in-group is primary. Additionally, Allport states that, while an in-group needs an out-group to be perceived, this does not imply that an in-group requires out-group hostility. Again, Allport, 1954, Addison Wesley. Now, Lippmann, 1922, Harcourt. A pseudo-environment is the space between an individual and their environment. Individuals respond in accordance with their pseudo-environment. However, the responses are not made in the pseudo-environment, but rather in the real environment. If one pseudo-environment does not match the real environment, the tragedy of the murder of a beautiful theory by a gang of brutal facts may occur. Again, Lippmann, 1922, Harcourt.